Hello, my name is GiBi, this is Toto, and welcome to the Spooky Shack. This is a video in an ongoing series where we're reading the Five Nights at Freddy's Tales from the Pizzaplex books. In this video, we're going to summarize, analyze, and theorize about the next story, Cleithrophobia. I'm currently investigating Storytaleser, a theory that these books are in-universe ChatGPT-like outputs of the sleeping computer F10N4, as implied by the games. Cleithrophobia is written by Andrea Wagner. Clifford, welcome. You're late.
Sorry. I slept in.
Yeah, you missed pressure.
I was jet-lagged from Kentucky. I wanted to take a nap, but I was scared a teenager would eat my face.
No more dream sphere for you. It's giving you nightmares.
Nightmares? Like, female horses?
Is this gonna be your new thing? The horses? Answer me, yes or no.
Nay.
Cleithrophobia is written by Andrea Wagner. Cleithrophobia is the fear of being trapped. Claustrophobia is the fear of enclosed spaces. These are different. Interesting that Cleithrophobia and Somniphobia are in the same book. By interesting, I mean it confuses me, because there's a bunch of other phobias in the series, and Scott should have come up with more creative titles, or they all should have been phobias. Summary: Kim, Eric, Cole, and Alicia are in the Mega Pizzaplex. They're in 6th or 7th grade, which to my non-American viewers is 12 or 13 years old. Kim is our point of view protagonist. She knows that Eric has a crush on her, but she doesn't see him the same way. They walk around the Pizzaplex looking for which attraction they want to go on first. They're cross-referencing all of the rides with their map. Just past the shops, the aromas of pizza sauce and cheese wafting through the main dining room enticed all four of them. Eric's stomach rumbled audibly, and Cole complained that he was going to starve if they didn't eat now. Kim was tempted to give in to them because the pizza did smell amazing, but she knew it was a bad idea. "Do you remember when we went on the octopus at the county fair after we had burgers?" Kim asked her friends. The boys went pale, and Alicia laughed. Of course they remembered. Whirling around on a full stomach was never a good idea. Bad idea, good idea? We could call them Biggie. After walking around the whole Pizzaplex, Kim tries to get them to go on the roller coaster. But Eric notices something on the key on the map. There's an attraction called Bellora's Fitness and Flex, but there isn't actually that attraction on the map itself. They shrug this off and they go on the coaster. We then get bold text saying 5 months earlier, and we cut to the perspective of a man named Grady. We will not, for the entire rest of the story, be checking back in with the Biggie crew. We'll be following Grady for the rest of this tale. Grady is working at the Pizzaplex before its official opening. He's at the carousel and he's thinking about how he doesn't like Foxy or animatronics in general. Artificial intelligence had never seemed like a good idea to him. He didn't think it was good for robots to have too much control. Lots of good ideas in this one, Andrea. Also dramatic irony because we know the whole saga is about artificial intelligence taking over, and so we know that he is correct. Grady feels uneasy in the quiet, devoid of people Pizzaplex, working on machines as a technician. His coworker Ronan taps him on the shoulder and scares him. Or, Grady corrects us as the narrator, he doesn't feel scared, because he's only scared of one thing, but we don't get to learn what it is, so I guess we're gonna have to guess. I think it's gonna be Cleithrophobia. Grady and Ronan are working with a guy named Tate. Tate's a bit of a jerk and reminds Grady of someone from his past who he'd rather forget. I wonder what that's about. Tate wants to leave early so he can go and have dinner with his girlfriend, and says that they can finish their work on the machines in the morning. But Grady has plans the next day. Tomorrow's Saturday. He has to play video games with his friends. He already bought the chips. There's a major raid going on. And he doesn't want to have to come back to work. He wants to finish the work tonight. Ronan doesn't necessarily have an opinion other than it's time to clock out, so it makes more sense for them to come back tomorrow. The three guys argue and keep saying that it's against company policy for them to split up or for anyone to work alone. But Grady finally convinces them to let him stay and finish the work, and so Tate and Ronan reluctantly leave. Grady is now alone in the Pizzaplex. He only has 2 more attractions to look at. Skee Ball and Ballorus Fitness. Ooh, that's from the beginning of the story. We know that 5 months from now it will no longer exist. Dramatic irony, something's gonna go wrong. Probably him encountering an AI he doesn't like that shouldn't have been put in control. Probably Ballora. The entrance to Ballorus Fitness is through a basic door near the tubes. The tubes from Haps. He passes the tubes and he thinks about how he doesn't ever want to go in that tube maze. According to the specs he'd read, a maintenance robot, Haps, was designed to keep the pipes safe, but Grady didn't want to be the one to test it out. He didn't want to leave his safety in the hands of newly built robotics. Grady paused at the base of the stairs. He frowned. Wasn't that what he was going to be doing in Ballorus Fitness and Flex? Grady is shaking by the time he gets to Ballorus Fitness. Clearly, there's something in here that counts as the one thing that he fears. Ballorus Fitness and Flex was an exercise venue different from anything Grady had seen before. Like a climbing wall, it was a vertical attraction. The starting platform was 50 feet up in the air, reached by a long ladder. An intricate series of serpentine tubes led from the platform to the floor. The tunnels were made of clear plastic, and they tapered from a few feet wide at the top to what appeared to be barely wide enough for a teenager to squeeze through at the bottom. All of them were visible behind the transparent wall that enclosed them. Grady shivered. It looked like an ant farm. The idea behind the venue, Grady knew, was to force participants to wiggle and pull themselves through the tight spaces, requiring them to twist and turn and stretch themselves around the curves of the tunnels to get to the bottom. All this physical activity was designed to provide aerobic, strengthening, and flexibility conditioning. And, theoretically, a lot of fun. Grady was more than skeptical about the fun. Grady says he hates exercise, and we get a flashback to when the 3 technicians were discussing who has to fix which attraction. Grady says he doesn't want to test Ballora Fitness because he's not fit. He says the most exercise he gets is getting up from his gaming chair to go to the fridge. Ronan has a bodybuilder's physique, which in the beginning of the story was humorously contrasted with the fact that his plans for the evening were to knit a sweater. And Tate is a jerk because he says he doesn't want to do it because he's got bad knees, so Grady has to do it. But he's saying this because he knows Grady doesn't want to do it because of the aforementioned being a big jerk. Back in the present, Grady starts eating a candy bar. And I think the clear reason for all these little comments is to make sure the reader knows that Grady is fat. Grady unwrapped the bar and bit into the chocolate and nougat. He immediately felt his anxiety ease. Food had always been his comfort. It was amazing, Grady thought, how patterns established in childhood stayed with you into adulthood. Grady was almost 28 years old, and his daily reactions were nearly all dictated by experiences he had when he was little. The food, for example, and his biggest fear. I think he's gonna get stuck in the tube because he's too fat and big. Grady has a traumatic flashback to the origin of his fear. When he was a kid, his parents hired a babysitter. Her boyfriend came over and suggested that they play hide and seek. Her boyfriend looked a lot like Tate does now in the modern day, which is one of the reasons Grady doesn't like Tate. The boyfriend shoves Grady in a closet with just enough room for him to crouch down, and then he closes it. Grady is stuck. He can't reach up for the handle because a shelf is in the way, and he actually hurts his arm trying to force through it, because everyone in these stories is always hurting their arms. He's wearing a glow-in-the-dark watch, so he's getting by and trying to keep his sanity by watching the clock tick every second. He's in there for 373 minutes, which is just over 6 hours. I looked at the meaning of the number 373 and I didn't find anything. According to Grady's mother, she and Grady's dad had come home about half an hour earlier than they said they would. They'd found Francis and Boone asleep on the couch together. When Boone had finally admitted where he'd stashed Grady, the boy had been barely conscious. Grady hadn't spoken for days after that. Grady never found out exactly what happened to Francis and Boone. He just knew his parents said they were pressing charges. At the time, Grady wasn't sure what it meant, but he hoped it hurt Francis and Boone a lot. When all was said and done, the only injury Grady got from his time in the closet was a sprained wrist and a sore throat, but the unseen damage was the real problem. He was in therapy for months before he'd let anyone close his bedroom door. He even had issues with his parents closing and locking the doors to the house. And the car was worse. Soon, any enclosed small space was a problem. Those months had been hard on Grady and his parents. Sometimes they acted like they felt guilty about what had happened, and sometimes they acted exasperated by Grady's problems. The only good thing Grady could remember about those months was that his parents let him eat a lot of food they'd never let him have before. They bought him whatever candy or chips or other junk food he'd wanted. The food had distracted him from his fears. Recently, Grady's mom had told him it was her fault that he was addicted to junk food. She'd been so relieved when he'd sit in front of the TV and eat instead of freaking out about closed doors that she'd let him eat as much of it as he'd wanted. It is, genuinely disturbing the way that, you can have an event like this where, a babysitter locks you in a room and then you go mute for a period of time, and obviously he got over that quickly, but it created lifelong issues for him. Do you guys think that the boyfriend's name is Boone because he went there to bone? When you need to come up for a random name for a character that's not going to come back in the story, and you're like, he's there to bone, so he's Boone. Oh, this guy's really big. Ronan's really big. What? Ronan sounds like Conan? And I need the name of someone who's a jerk. What about Tate? Because Tate sounds like... Grady thinks for a moment about not testing the Ballora attraction. But then he worries about what might happen if he doesn't test it and it malfunctions. It might give some poor kid the same trauma that he himself went through. So he climbs the big ladder 50 feet to the top, gets winded, and then looks down the maze of pipes. Gets scared, and asks himself, are you a man or a mouse? Which sent me down a rabbit hole looking into the origin of that phrase, but apparently no one knows, and the oldest recorded use of it we have is from the 1500s, and we don't know why it started being used. But basically it means, are you going to be like a man, strong and brave, or are you going to be like a mouse, small and timid? So is he brave or cowardly? He's a man, he's brave, so he's going to go into the ant farm. We're kind of mixing and matching our animal things here. But that's what's happening. Mice don't go in ant farms. Grady hypes himself up to go down the tube, but then he hears something behind him. He turns around and sees Ballora. He calls her haunting. He'd earlier said that the empty pizzaplex was filled with ghosts, but not like in the dead child sense, more in the liminal, space-feeling empty mall at night sense. So these animatronics are being tied to the idea of being haunted. Because they probably are, literally, but both also in the way he means that the space is haunted. You get it, you're following. Ballora. Ballora was an animatronic designed to look like a ballerina. In the sketches Grady had seen, Ballora wore a blue leotard and tutu. But this version of Ballora was just her upper body, which was attached to a robotic mechanism that moved her through the exercise venue. She was pretty in a weirdly robotic way. Ballora had blue hair caught up in a bun and held with what looked like a fan-shaped flamenco dancer-style comb. All this was actually painted metal. Like most of Fazbear Entertainment's animatronics, Ballora had more teeth than Grady thought were necessary. However, the teeth were tempered somewhat by the pink blush on Ballora's sculpted cheeks. Ballora's endoskeleton was made of a combination of metal and thick rubber-encased wires arranged to resemble musculature. Her limbs were articulated so she could move with the grace of a dancer. In most of the sketches, Ballora stood with her arms lifted gracefully over her head, but right now, they were thrown out to her side, as if making a grand welcoming gesture.
I encourage you to slide on in.
Ballora began singing again.
That's the best way to begin. I'm here to make sure you don't get stuck.
That word made the little hairs at the back of Grady's neck stand upright. He felt them bristle against his skin. She just had to go and say the word stuck. This was, of course, Grady's biggest fear. Yeah, so at this point we know that getting stuck or trapped in small spaces is Grady's biggest fear, from his childhood trauma that he then coped with by eating and thus gaining weight, and now he has to travel down really thin tubes that get thinner as they go down, and he's scared of robots because he thinks that AI shouldn't be in charge of stuff, and he doesn't trust haps, and so what we can imagine is that he's going to get stuck in the tubes, and Ballora's going to have to save him, and I hope it goes well for him. Ballora says the exact phrase, "I'm here to make sure you don't get stuck," twice, which reminds me of the scary stories where the creature, the ghost, the monster, repeats a simple phrase 3 times, and then something bad happens, and it takes on an ironic meaning. This story has the least amount of suspense I could possibly imagine because it has the most obvious ending possible coming. Now begins 16 pages of Grady being in the tubes. If you thought Haps was boring, that story was 2 kids in tubes, and they could run around and break stuff and do things. This is one story of a guy talking to himself, being stuck in a tube. Grady moves through the tube, it hurts, he's sweating, he smells bad, it's really hot in there, aren't you scared? He gets through tube number 1, which ends in a checkpoint. So this is a platform that's still enclosed, like an ant farm, he can't get out, but he's not stuck in the tube anymore. He tries to think about how this is not like being stuck in the closet. He then continues into tube 2, which is even thinner. He crawls through it for a minute before he was, just as he'd most feared, stuck. Grady sucked in his gut and jiggled himself from side to side. He wrenched himself back and forth. Nothing worked. He wasn't budging. If he'd had something to grab onto, he might have been able to yank himself downward. But when he tried to grip the tube's surface, his hand slipped. His sweat wasn't in his favor now. Grady thrashed for several minutes, getting more and more freaked out. Finally, he screamed, "Help! Ballora!" he called out. "Help! I want out!" When nothing happened immediately after his yell, Grady screamed again, "Help me!" Ballora held out her hands.
Here, let me help you.
Grady wasn't keen on giving Ballora control over him, which she'd have if he let her take his hands. But what choice did he have? Besides, Ballora was programmed to help people make it through the fitness tubes. Grady had seen her specs. She'd get him out of this predicament. Grady stretched his arms down so Ballora could take his hands. Ballora grabbed them. As soon as Ballora's metal fingers closed over Grady's softer ones, she clamped down. Her grip pinched his knuckles. "Ow!" Grady complained. Ballora ignored him. She started skimming downward through the tube, her systems thrumming deeply. The sound vibrated the tube's plastic walls. Ballora didn't go too fast, but even so, when she tugged, Grady thought his arms were going to come out of their sockets. This tube didn't seem to have any straight stretches at all. It was all twist, turn, loop, bend, and twist, turn. Ballora, however, had no trouble maneuvering through the tight spaces, and she had no problem dragging Grady along with her. Following several more twists and turns, Grady's ows turned into groans and moans, and his groans quickly turned into screams. The pain in his shoulders began spreading. It radiated down his arms and up through his neck. He focused on his breathing. In and out, in and out. After just a few breaths, Grady found himself on another small platform. They'd reached checkpoint number 2. Just like checkpoint number 1, it was a small platform enclosed within the tube. Grady sits there and cries, and he thinks about waiting for Tate and Ronan to arrive the next morning to check in on him. But after a while, he looks at the next and final tube, and reasons that if it's the same size as the previous one, and he got through that, he could get through this one. And he'd rather do that than sit in this space all night, because this small enclosed space is like the closet. So he enters into the final tube, and then it ends up being thinner, which he knew before going in. I guess he was just doing some wishful thinking, but nope, it is thinner. The tube around him didn't feel like a tube anymore. It felt like a second skin. It hugged him like a sausage casing compressing ground pork. For several seconds, Grady breathed in and out, relatively calm. But then a horrifying thought leapt to the top of his mind. What if Ballora showed up without being called? Ballora had nearly dismantled his body the first time she'd pulled him through the tunnel. He didn't want to imagine what she'd do in this situation. Dismantled his body, you say? The thing the Mimic was programmed to do in the epilogues that we read. Ballora being controlled by the network that's actually the Mimic malfunctioning. Ballora comes. As Ballora went down another turn, Grady's wrists cracked. He heard them snapping like breaking pretzels. As soon as they did, he could tell his fists were flopping at the end of his arms. Ballora must have noticed as well. She shifted her grip to Grady's forearms. As soon as Ballora let go of his clenched fingers, Grady realized the fingers were broken. Actually, they weren't just broken, they were crushed. Ballora had clamped down so hard that she'd pulverized the fragile bones. When Grady tried to move his fingers, he could feel the bone chips grinding together. As Ballora tugged Grady down around the next twisting turn, his forearms popped free of his elbow joints. Then they, too, fractured. He heard the crunch as the bones were compressed in Ballora's grip. Before the next curve in the tube, Ballora repositioned her grip once again. As she did, one of her metal fingers impaled Grady's left eye. Grady felt warmth course over his cheek. He knew his now eyeless socket was gushing blood, but he couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't do anything about anything. All Grady could do was scream and cry as he felt his body break apart. Next chapter, now we're following Ronan and Tate from Ronan's perspective. He and Tate arrive at the Pizzaplex the next day. We get some characterization about Tate. He's been complaining about how slow Ronan goes, how much time they're wasting, he just wants to leave. He's also super competitive. They go inside to the employee-only area, and he sees which tasks Grady has checked off because he wants to check off more, and he notices that he never finished the Ballora section. And he laughs and he says, "Oh, I bet Grady got stuck back in there because he's so fat, and that's why his car is still here in the parking lot." He wants to go and check it out, and Ronan is like, "I thought you wanted to hurry up and leave and go home." And Tate's like, "Well, hey, it's okay to waste time if we're making fun of Grady." He thinks it's funny that Grady got stuck with his task because he has claustrophobia. Grady doesn't have claustrophobia, Ronan said. He has Cleithrophobia. Tate ignored him. Whatever. It's the fear of being trapped, Ronan explained. People with claustrophobia don't like small spaces, whether they're trapped or not. People with Cleithrophobia can tolerate small spaces as long as they know they can come and go. They're afraid of being stuck. Tate raised an eyebrow. "How do you know all that?" Ronan shrugged. "I read." Ronan lengthened his stride, and Tate trotted to keep up. "But why do you know that's what Grady has?" Tate asked. Ronan flicked a glance at Tate. "I listen." As they walk to Ballora Fitness, Ronan thinks about how his biggest fear is body horror and any kind of gore. They arrive, they look inside, Ronan almost vomits. Tate comforts him, telling him to breathe. Ronan worries that he'll never recover from what they're looking at. Ronan wondered if he'd ever erase from his mind the image of Grady's wrecked body suspended upside down in the tube, tucked back and forth, unthinkably, in a tight series of the tube's zigzags. How would Ronan ever forget Grady's misshapen face, with its one remaining good eye plastered against the plastic? He was sure he'd never be able to wipe from his memory banks Grady's empty socket, or the eyeball dangling from one of Ballora's metal fingers. And he would be forever tormented by the image of Grady's 5'6" frame, elongated into nearly twice that length. Grady's body now so deconstructed that it was strewn through the tube. Ronan panics and says they need to call the police, but Tate looks closer at Grady and says, "He's not dead. He's still blinking. He's still moving." Ronan says they have to call 911, but Tate disagrees. They'll be fired if Fazbear finds out that they broke protocol and they let Grady stay there overnight. Ronan says they have to try to save him, he's in terrible pain, and Tate says that he doubts it. Tate says that his spine probably snapped. He probably can't feel anything. He's paralyzed. If he's not already unconscious and dying, he'll be dead before the police could get there. He's just having spasms. He's not actually blinking. He's not actually moving. He doesn't know that they're there. He's completely unconscious. They should leave him. They should come back to work on Monday. They should pretend that Grady must have snuck in by himself. There's no security cameras here after all. Ronan lifted his head and forced himself to look at Grady again. If he was going to abandon a dying man, the least he could do was acknowledge the man before he left. This is how Cleithrophobia ends. Grady's remaining eye watched his coworkers. They disappeared around the corner of the yellow hallway. He hadn't been able to hear everything Ronan and Tate had said. Even though his ears still worked, they were the only body parts that had avoided massive trauma. The tube and the transparent wall muted sound. He had, however, heard enough. Grady had wanted to cry even more than he already had, when Tate had hypothesized that Grady was paralyzed. If only. Yes, Grady's spine was broken, but somehow his nerve endings were functioning just fine. The totality of his body was one throbbing mass of indescribable suffering. Grady couldn't hate his coworkers for leaving him to die. He'd probably have done the same thing if he'd been in their place. He needed the job just as badly, but he wished they'd stayed with him a little while longer. Ballora, who had been silently pulling on Grady the whole time Ronan and Tate had been standing there talking, spoke up.
"You're stuck, I'll help you."
She yanked harder, and Grady heard a series of wet pops and 2 cracks. New waves of pain sluiced through Grady's arms and cascaded through his whole body. Grady couldn't even protest the assault on his system. Even if he could have, he wouldn't have. He was dying, and the only company he had was Ballora. He wouldn't have sent her away now for anything. If Grady had to die trapped in his worst nightmare, he didn't want to do it alone. Even Ballora's cold and unfeeling grip was better than nothing. Ballora spoke up one more time.
You're stuck, I want to help.
Analysis. I think at the end there, when she tugged off his arm one more time and you heard the pops, I think his arms were torn off, because the Mimic did this to Jessica, and the Mimic did this to, Billy. Kind of. It's like if you theorize that the point of B7 was that his limbs were removed because of a Mimic mind virus, it was kind of the Mimic, but it definitely is like the Mimic from the epilogue. Anyway, the moral of the story is that Fazbear is a bad company for being dangerous. Don't cut corners and break safety rules. Don't be traumatized. Don't be fat. And Ballora will kill you. So I think at the end there, part of the moral is that Ronan should not have fallen for Tate's peer pressure. Much like the story Pressure, he was convinced to do something against his own values because someone else said to. I thought the story was going to end with Tate and Ronan, like, locking the door and then crossing it off the map, and then we'd cut forward to the Biggie gang going like, let's explore, and then they'd, like, break in and turn the lights on, and it would end with the lights coming on. But that doesn't happen. We never catch up to them again. So now we're going to talk about them. We're going to talk about the Biggie gang. There's a lot of cool Easter eggs in this story. Kim wants to go on the roller coaster, but her friends want to walk around and look at everything before deciding what to do. Kim has the map and she's directing them, and she points out the roleplay auditorium from Pressure and the tubes from Haps, as well as... The shout coming from her right caught Kim's attention. A crew of Pizzaplex workers were clustered around the AR booth, which stood between the tilt-a-whirl and the theater in the middle of the Pizzaplex. Smoke filled the booth's glass enclosure. The crew appeared to be trying to pry the booth open. Kim looked down at the map. On the map, the AR booth was depicted as a pristine, crystal-like globe of fantasy come to life. She had a feeling no fantasies would be coming to life in there today. She just hoped the AR booth was the only venue with problems. So that's the booth from Under Construction. That's the globe that Maya is in. And her fantasy isn't coming to life, her nightmare is coming to life. It's probably filling with smoke because it's malfunctioning. This is the day, the moment, that Maya and maybe Jackson Noel got trapped inside, which is interesting because it means that their entire story was a hallucination and wasn't real. The smoke might also put her into a coma. We have her here in a broken glass sphere, which is kind of what the moon drop sphere was in the story Somniphobia, where a broken glass sphere made you dream in a coma forever. And we didn't really talk about it in Somniphobia, but it's very possible that instead of the dog eating the kid's face, that instead he just sort of dreamed that was happening and he ended up in a coma, like the guy in the beginning of that story did. So basically we have two instances of glass spheres being broken that can leave you in comas, meaning either Maya gets out of the sphere and everything is totally fine, you know, she's being crushed to death by the cancer blobs, but then she's saved by the Pizzaplex workers, or they remove her and she's in a coma and then she dreams all of that for like the rest of her life. Kim hoping that the AR booth is the only thing that's broken implies, perhaps using like dramatic irony, that other things might be broken at that exact moment, which could imply that Haps and Pressure are happening simultaneously with Under Construction. The implication could be that the tube maze is also broken, and the implication could be that the roleplay theater is broken because there's a real Springlock suit in there. So it's very possible, likely even, that Haps, Under Construction, Pressure, and the beginning of this story are happening on the exact same day. Later in these stories, we're going to learn about two other events that happen at the same time, which makes me wonder if all of these different events are happening at the same time, but we'll have to discuss that in the story teller. We're now going to go to Grady. When he's first left alone in the building, he comments that the security cameras are offline, and this is important because it's why they never find him, but it also gives us some interesting details. The exterior of the Pizzaplex had an active security system, but no one was here to man it, and all the cameras were offline. Fazbear Entertainment was having trouble with the internal computer network. Employee records were being kept in physical files because the system had dumped the data. It was kind of the Dark Ages, but apparently the programmers were working on it. So right now, a couple months before opening, the internal network is acting up, and they're having trouble with it. Is this storytellerisms? Is this David and Fiona probably haunting the building isms? Because we're going to think when we eventually get to the storyteller that David, Fiona, Mimic, whatever, isn't actually in charge of the Pizzaplex until it's plugged in. But if there's already computer errors going on, it's and Ballora's already like haunted, it's possible that there was already stuff in the Pizzaplex beforehand. Stuff meaning haunted computers. The fact that the mimic is physically beneath them at this moment. Now, I talk about this a lot, but quite a few of these stories are just common fears put into a story. Like, he told me everything is just, oh my gosh, my teeth fell out. And this story is Cleithrophobia. Cool. Is this story based on a fairy tale or an urban legend? I don't know. I've definitely heard scary fake stories about being stuck in a slide forever, but not really like this where there's like a Ballora and she comes and she grabs you and she pulls you through. He does get literally walled up in the end, and there are urban legends and ghost stories about people being walled up like in a castle. Like, oh no, the lord of the castle's son was born with such a disgusting disfigurement that they put him in a room and they sealed it shut. Or, there's like a story where there's a nun who breaks her vows, and so they put her into the nunnery and they put her behind a brick wall, and so she dies in there, and now she haunts the building. Like that, those are stories that could inspire something like this. Those are urban legends and ghost stories that this could fit because he ends up being stuck in the wall. Maybe. If I can ever think of a way to justify, like, telling that kind of ghost story, I definitely will. But right now, we're just gonna move on because we are done with the story of Cleithrophobia. And I think it's the worst story that we've read so far. It's not as boring as Lally's game, but it is just so nothing. I don't care about the characters. I'm not in suspense about what's going to happen next. In a month, I don't think I'll ever think of this story again. Now we're going to begin our analysis of the entire book, Somniphobia. So going back to the story Somniphobia, Sam is scared because of childhood trauma. He has lots of friends, but one of them is a bully, and he finds comfort in something that's unhealthy for him. He takes the drug too far, and he ends up dying from something that was established at the beginning of the story. That being a dog eating his face. It's Fazbear's fault, but he could have just said no. Luca from Pressure is scared of adults who hurt children because of childhood trauma. He has lots of friends, but one of them is a bully. He's peer pressured into doing something he knows is wrong, his friends don't help him because they don't fully understand what's happening, and he ends up dying from something established in the beginning of the story. The spring lock suit that we always thought was real. It's Fazbear's fault, but he could have just said no. Grady is scared of being trapped because of childhood trauma. He has 2 co-workers and one is a bully. He finds comfort in something that's unhealthy for him that he takes too far and ends up dying because of. It's Fazbear's fault, although in this case I don't think him being thin would have actually helped. I still think Ballora would have eventually killed someone. And also, even if his buddies were there, he probably also would have died, but he could have just not done it. So I think it's interesting that we have this like triangle with each protagonist where they each share half of their characteristics with one of the other protagonists and then half with the other. And all 3 of them have childhood trauma and all 3 of them have friends who fail them. If Sam's friends went home right away instead of going to Freddy's, he'd have lived. If Luca's friends realized that he was being hurt instead of leaving him behind, he'd have lived. And if Grady's buddies had stayed behind, he might have lived. The antagonist of Somniphobia is the Moon Machine, but also not really. Like, there's not really an antagonist besides Fazbear's negligence and mental illness. The antagonist of Pressure could be said to be the 3 friends. They don't try to hurt Luca, but they do put him in an unfortunate situation. They are the peer pressure that the story is named after, but there is a better villain in the story. That's Earl. That's the guy who's preying on the girls. And it's the person who ultimately he dies killing. He dies stopping. And the antagonist of Cleithrophobia is Ballora, but also Tate, because Tate is the reason that the situation's happening in the first place. Also, the babysitter, Boone. So the protagonists are a very comprehensive trio. They all fit together in the same sort of idea, the same concept of a protagonist. But the antagonists in these 3 stories, if there is an antagonist, aren't so much the same as each other. The back of the book moral says, "What are you running from? What are you running from? Our deepest fears have a way of chasing us." Does this apply to Somniphobia? Not really. Does this apply to Pressure? His fear would be something to the effect of people who hurt children, which is why he is scared of Springtrap. But it doesn't chase him to put on the suit, he does it because of peer pressure. And then him in the suit chases a child predator. So he's not being chased, he's doing the chasing. And then in Cleithrophobia, yes, Ballora chases him through the tube, I guess. Although more metaphorically, the thing that he's scared of is enclosed spaces from when he was a child, and even now that he's an adult, he still needs to deal with enclosed spaces that he can't get out of. So, what actually is the moral of this book of all 3 stories. Peer pressure. Somniphobia is an allegory for drug use. Pressure is overtly about peer pressure, and Cleithrophobia has 3 instances of peer pressure. Ronan and Tate making Grady be the one to do Ballora Fitness, Tate and Ronan leaving Grady alone, and Tate convincing Ronan to leave and to let Grady die. Mob mentality, peer pressure, etc. all tie these 3 stories together really, really well, and so I think it's so interesting that that's not the moral on the back cover. I wonder if Scott knew he grouped these 3 stories together in this way, and that it would have been more cohesive if that was actually the intention of the book, or if Andrea, if she wrote these stories back to back to back, kind of just kept including elements of a thing that was on her mind at the time. I really don't see any one-to-one connections between these 3 stories and urban legends, besides like the idea of eternal sleep, like is Sam Sleeping Beauty or Snow White. Luca is living his own urban legend because it's based on the urban legend of Springtrap, and like I said, it's possible that we're supposed to interpret Grady as one of those, and then they nailed the nun into the wall behind a brick wall things, but it's not as clear as like Frailty being Cinderella was. Now we have to ask ourselves 3 questions. Is what is weak seeming strong? Is what is impossible possible? And is the greatest danger we face ourself? For Luca, his greatest weakness is being in the Springlock suit. For Luca, him not wanting to be in the Springlock suit is a strength, not a weakness. His weakness is peer pressure, and that does not end up being strong. It doesn't apply to the other 2 either. Is the impossible possible? With Luca, he's able to fight through the Springlock suit and, in my opinion, possess it, so yes, that's impossible. But for Grady, he thinks that going through the tubes is impossible, and he's correct, so it doesn't apply to him. The greatest danger we face is ourselves. That is true for Sam. The entirety of Sam's story is like his own fault. I would not call the greatest danger Luca faces himself because he's facing a Springlock suit, and I would not say that the greatest danger that Grady faces is himself or Ballora the animatronic. It's really just like the tube. Maybe you could say it's because he's fat, but like I don't think that that's necessarily supposed to be part of the moral of the story. It's more of something that needed to be said in the story in order for the outcome to happen. It's not like Willy Wonka where the moral is, don't be fat. A kid does get sucked into a tube in Willy Wonka. Is Augustus Gloop Grady? Grady Group? Gravy? No, there's nothing there. This whole project, I've been wondering at what point I would have been convinced that Tales is not canon had I been reading these before that was confirmed. And I think Pressure having a Springlock suit that looks just like Springtrap would be too weird of a detail for me to go, oh yeah, of course, that's exactly what happens in the games. Yeah, you can explain that in a security breach. I really don't think so. I can see someone going, yes, that's where Burn Trap came from. No. So yeah, this would definitely be a knock against me assuming they're canon, but I don't think it would be the final nail in the coffin. Now we're going to go over the tier list of every story we've read so far. S tier, nothing. A tier, Pressure, Somniphobia. B tier, Under Construction, B7, Frailty, Help Wanted. C tier, Haps, Lally's Game, Cleithrophobia. I don't hate any of them, but I also don't love any of them. And that was And that was Somniphobia. 1 more book down, only 5 to go. Our next book is Somniphobia, another phobia story. Thanks, Scott. But before we actually get to Somniphobia, we have to take another break. With the completion of the book Somniphobia, it's now time for our next intermission, our cultural literacy intermission. Remember last time, during our Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark break, I hinted about what we'd be covering now? I said, I'm not going to spoil what it is, but let's just say it's something I should have covered a long time ago. Something I should have covered even before Fazbear Frights. Something that gives a context to the world in which these stories were written in, and the publishing industry that decided to publish these books for Scott Cawthon. And now, what we've all been waiting for that I have done a terrible job hiding from you. We are finally going to cover Star Wars Tales from Vader's Castle. I told you we should have covered it a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So, Tales from Vader's Castle is a short comic book horror series that was published beginning in October of 2018. And the main reason that we're going to cover it both is that it is called Tales from Vader's Castle, the same way that we're looking at Tales from the Pizzaplex, but it actually has a lot more in common with Tales than you might expect. See, these comics, this whole book, are in-universe horror stories coming out over a year before Into the Pit, not just Tales, but Frights. These stories are set in the Star Wars universe, but within the universe, they are fictional ghost stories. Literally, the theory that we're discussing for Tales from the Pizzaplex canonically applies to a Star Wars comic series that came out before Frights was even published. So if you look out at the milieu of stories being set in the existing universe of a popular franchise that aren't technically canon, and thus the people who are actually running the story don't need to make sure they line up with canon because they're just horror stories for children, you would have seen Star Wars, and then a year later FNAF. So the conceit of the comic is that some characters are trapped outside of Vader's castle, and they tell each other ghost stories, kind of like how characters are in the Pizzaplex. Vader's castle is so much like the Pizzaplex, it's going to be scary. And so they're telling each other stories the same way that Alvin Schwartz did in the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. These are old stories that are being reimagined for the current context. And, much like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and much like Tales from the Pizzaplex, whereas we keep discussing, the stories are basically just old urban legends and fairy tales, like how Frailty is just Cinderella, these stories, mostly, are just old stories. The second one we're gonna look at, well, maybe I'll keep that a secret for now, but let's just say it involves a specific Count, played by Christopher Lee, and in this story he is a different Count portrayed by Christopher Lee. If you know your mid-20th century horror movies, you're going to be like, oh my god, I cannot believe they did that. Yeah, they did that. So the horror stories in Vader's Castle are an anthology series of fictional stories recounted by our main characters. The first of which is actually told by someone who heard the story originally from the character Chopper, who is a droid, or you could say a storytelling computer. So a machine telling a story. It is Tales Blogger, and it is Storytelser, and that's why we're looking at it. And again, if you're not into Star Wars, don't worry about any of the context. The minimal context you'll need, I'll explain as we go. Like small things, like how the castle, Vader's castle, is built on top of a haunted location. He built it there because he's trying to bring his family back, and he's unfortunately stuck inside of a robotic suit being kept alive by the franchise's dark source of magic, but that's okay, because he's accepted a new name and a new identity for himself. Anyway, when I found out that this comic existed by friend of the channel, Absolix Guardian, I knew I had to talk about it because coverage of Tales could not be complete without discussing the other popular franchise that was adapted into a series of children's horror stories that are actually just in-universe tales. So as important as Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is to FNAF, and as important as the next series we're going to talk about next time we have a cultural literacy intermission, we need to discuss Vader's Castle. Yes, it will be a long time before we get back to Five Nights at Freddy's, but we're not going to just be talking about Star Wars, so don't worry. We're now going to start with Issue 1, Haunting of the Ghost. Haunting of the Ghost is a great title, like, ghosts haunt things. But that's not the only reason it's called that. The Ghost is actually the name of this ship. This is the ship that we first see in Star Wars Rebels. It is piloted by Hera Syndulla, but you will later see it in the Ahsoka series. And this little shuttle comes off, and this is called the Phantom. And so when they leave the ship, they can fly around on the Phantom to get to their destination, while this can stay in space. At the point that our comic begins, the Ghost is piloted by Hera Syndulla, Kanan, who is a Jedi who survived a great Jedi purge, and their droid Chopper. They are outlaws who are trying to help the Rebel Alliance against the evil Empire. And our story begins when they're hailed by another rebel who needs their help. They're supposed to be meeting up with this person, but they never arrived. So Hera and Kanan go out to search and find where this person may have gone. Kanan is meditating, trying to open this glowy box thing. It's called a holocron. You have to open it using the Force, and he thinks it'll help him on his journey. But that's not important just yet. The guy they're looking for is named Grayson. and they find his ship crashed on an asteroid with clear damage to the ship. Chopper tells Hera and Kanan not to go outside and check, but they don't listen and they go anyway. They try to see where Grayson might be, and then Hera yells, but it's okay, it's not a ghost, she just got zapped by a zappy pad. They discover that Grayson's escape pod jettisoned from his ship before it crashed. I am shaking in my boots and I hope they don't find anything scary. They take off in the Ghost again, trying to track the escape pod, unaware that they had acquired a phantom passenger. They trace the signal and they find Grayson. He is a Birdman. He tells them that his ship crashed because it was haunted, and as soon as he says this, the lights go out. There's a cackling laugh. And Hera, like every character in a horror story, says there's a rational explanation for this. It's static, it's interference from the asteroid field that they're in. She goes to the cockpit to see what's going on, but the ladder is electrified. The spirit, it's followed me. Yo, spirits following you is how you get spring-locked. You gotta be careful, Grayson. The bay door opens, exposing them all to space. And just before Kanan is sucked through, Chopper overrides the command and closes the door. Alright, so astromech droids like R2-D2 have this little attachment to them that can basically interface with any computer in the Star Wars galaxy. It's kind of like a USB and a mouse. So you plug it in and then you can twirl it and you can basically do anything in order to interface and close down the thing. But Chopper is a little different. Chopper is chopped like a chop shop. Basically, he's a very damaged and rustic droid. So instead of having that USB extension, he has this arm. And so the implication is that when he puts the arm into these panels, he's basically just shorting out the electricity, and he just kind of stabs it. So that's what he's doing here in this panel. You can see him overriding the door bay opening and closing, and the reason that he's just kind of shoving this little arm thing into it is because he's a damaged, old, rundown, not fancy like R2-D2, old astromech droid. Anyway, Chopper tries to use the panel, but gets shocked. Kanan and Grayson are now trapped in Kanan's room, and the comms are down, so they cannot contact Hera. But Hera doesn't know this. Chopper, connected to the panel, starts talking, and for context, Chopper cannot speak, he makes little rubber sounds, so him speaking in English is odd. A ghost or a demon is now possessing him to speak through him. You should have run, Twi'lek. You should have turned head, tail, and fled as soon as you heard my laughter. But now the joke is on you. Now you shall feel my wrath. He's a demon, he's a demon. Actually, he's a dark force user. The Jedi stripped him of his physical form and then abandoned him in space. So his spirit stayed floating in the void for centuries, but he can now possess machines, which includes droids and spaceships, and he says his plan is that he's going to cause suffering throughout the entire galaxy by attacking people and shooting them with spaceships. Hera tells him, please, whatever you do, don't use your force powers that allows you to possess a robot machine computer and possess the little holocron thing over there. And the ghost goes, ha ha, you told me not to do that, so you clearly don't want me to, but I will do it right now. And then Kanan, having freed himself from his room, arrives just in time to watch the spirit possess the holocron and then close it. And now it can't be opened because it has to be opened with the force. Basically, the ghost is now trapped inside of this holocron that can never be opened, and it's his hubris that did it. As the crew celebrates, the narrator of this story tells us that even though the spirit left Chopper, droids always remember. Even after a memory wipe, something of their old experiences still remains, and we get a close-up on one of Chopper's eyes, and we hear the laughter of the raging spirit. The evil demon ghost lives to come back for a sequel, but there won't be one because this isn't canon. It's an in-universe story told to us by a guy who Chopper told it to, so it's not real. So now we're going to talk about the narrator of this tale. In Tales from Vader's Castle, we're following Lena Graff and her crew. This is set about a year before the fourth Star Wars movie when they blow up the Death Star. They're being chased, and they panic, and they get shot, and so they have to crash land on a nearby world. And they crash on the lava planet Mustafar. Mustafar is where Vader lost against Obi-Wan, and he caught on fire, and it's where his castle is. Lena's crew consists of Skrit, the technician, Hud, a thief-turned-rebel, G3, a robot bodyguard, and Crater, Lena's personal droid and friend. They have crashed in lava and they're going to die. Lena says this is a terror, and Hud says that this is a nightmare. Lena says they have to evacuate before they're killed by the lava, but Crater launches into the story that we just heard, about why you should never leave a ship, because if you leave a ship, then the ghost might possess your droid. That was supposed to be the moral of the story, is that Hera and Kanan should not have left their ship. Lena thinks this is dumb, and they escape the ship, and then it melts into lava, so it's a good thing that they left. Stranded, they only have one option. They must enter Vader's castle. It's a spooky fortress guarded by lots of stormtroopers, and it's this cliffhanger that ends the first issue of Tales from Vader's Castle. So here's the thing. No, we're not just going to launch into issue 2, we're not just going to talk about Star Wars straight for an hour.
Does that mean we're returning to FNAF and reading through Somniphobia?
No. See, this Star Wars comic is called The Haunting of the Ghost. It's a pun because the ship is named the Ghost. But it's not just a pun, it's an illusion. In fact, the author of this comic, Cavan Scott, said that the illusion was intentional, which is why now we need to launch in to The Haunting of Hill House. The Haunting of Hill House is a 1960 horror novel written by Shirley Jackson. We covered one of Shirley Jackson's other stories, The Lottery, back when we were talking about Count the Ways, the Fazbear Fright story. Haunting of Hill House has been adapted a few times, so it's very possible that you've heard the story or even watched it before, because there was a very popular Netflix series a couple years ago. But the story in the series and the book is very different. It's about, well, a haunted house. And I think having covered The Fall of the House of Usher back in Frights is good background info going into this haunted house story. It's like a continuity from Poe to Jackson to potentially another horror writer in the future who also wrote a story about a haunted house that we need this context for. It's good background info to have on the history of horror, which is also important to Five Nights at Freddy's. And so, now we will begin to summarize, analyze, and theorize about the entirety of The Haunting of Hill House. The book begins with a description of Hill House. The house is like its own character, and we learn that it sits against the hills. The house is dark inside. It's about 80 years old and has brick walls that lie silently. But that's just the physical stuff. And because this book is an actual book, a piece of, classic literature, and it's written well, there's important things to learn other than the physical descriptions of the house. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there, walked alone. Don't you guys love poetic prose and word choice and things like saying that the house isn't sane? That is incredible. It is a scary house, but it doesn't just say that the house is scary because it's written well, and Andrea can write well a lot of the time, but this is an actual good novel with good prose. I'm very excited. Then we meet our second character, because the house is character number 1. Our second character is Dr. John Montague, a doctor of philosophy who wants to study ghosts. He wants to study Hill House to find ghosts, and so he rents it for the entire summer. He wants help, because whenever you're studying haunted houses, you always need some help, so he sends letters out to people who believe in ghosts. But he doesn't tell them that the house is haunted because he's a scientist, and so he's not going to claim it's haunted without proving it first. Only 2 people answer his letters, and they agree to come and stay in the house for 3 months without knowing what they're going to be doing. The first person who answers is a woman named Eleanor Vance. She's 32, and when she was a child, her father died. Rocks started raining down on her house after he passed. Her and her older sister thought that it was supernatural, but her disabled mother thought that it was just neighbors who hated them, throwing rocks at the house. The rocks continued to fall for 3 days until the girls were taken away from the house, and then the rocks stopped and never started again. This got Eleanor mentioned in a magazine that wrote about paranormal activity, which is where Dr. Montague got her name from. Eleanor went on to spend 11 years taking care of her mother before she died. Eleanor has no friends, hates her sister, and so she signed up to come and see whatever this house is, excited to get away from her sister for the entire summer. Our second paranormal activity person is Theodora. She was tested with those psychic card things where you try to use your powers to see what's on the other side of the card, and then you flip it over and then you're like, oh my god, I'm psychic. Or in reality, oh my god, I guessed really well. She scored really, really high on this test, and so she was noted down in a little scientific study about the paranormal. She recently got in a fight with her roommate, and so she decides to spend some time away from home at Hill House. Finally, rounding out our crew is Luke, the nephew of the house's owner, who has to be present for liability reasons. Luke is kind of a screw-up, and his aunt kind of just wants him out of the house for the summer, so he's going to go off to the haunted house and take care of those weirdos who are researching it for the entire summer. That is our cast. Let's begin the story. Eleanor has a terrible relationship with her sister and brother-in-law. She wants to take the car for the summer to Hill House. It's half her car. She paid for half and her sister paid for half. But her sister and brother-in-law don't want her to take it, making the excuse that it's actually important for them to go on a vacation. They are incredibly patronizing people. And while in this section we don't get Eleanor's internal monologue, the way the dialogue is written makes us hate the sister. And I really, really recommend that even after I give a whole summary of the story, you guys read the book, because even if knowing how it ends might alleviate a little bit of the tension, the way it's written scene to scene is very compelling. I'm of the opinion that knowing a spoiler shouldn't ruin a good story, and I think anyone who's read or seen a Shakespeare play in the last few hundred years should be able to attest to that, because like everyone knows how Romeo and Juliet ends, and it doesn't change the fact that it's a really good story. The sister forbids Eleanor from taking the car, but she decides to take it anyway. So she sneaks away with some stuff in her suitcase, and she has to go and take a taxi to where they keep their car parked in a parking garage in the city overnight. As she's leaving the taxi, she accidentally hits an old lady who's walking home with groceries and spills the food all over the sidewalk. She tries to make it up to this lady by paying for the food, but the old lady says, actually, this food was being thrown out. It was just given to me to take home, and I was going to make food with it, so you can't actually pay me back for it, because it was free. Eleanor says, oh my god, I'm so sorry. How about I pay for your taxi and give you some money? And the old lady says, okay, Eleanor, you seem like someone who has a lot of problems. I will pray for you. We then get a very, very long passage of Eleanor driving hundreds of miles in the half-stolen car toward Hill House. She passes a nice house with some stone lions, and she fantasizes about living there. She stops at a restaurant for lunch, and we get a scene where she overhears commotion at the table next to her, where a family with a young girl is refusing to drink her milk. She says she only drinks milk out of her special cup that has stars in it, and the parents are trying to convince her to do it anyway, and Eleanor secretly hopes that the girl doesn't drink the milk and sticks to her principles. You'll have your milk from your cup of stars tonight when we get home, but just for now, just to be a very good little girl, will you take a little milk from this glass? Don't do it, Eleanor told the little girl. Insist on your cup of stars. Once they've trapped you into being like everyone else, you will never see your cup of stars again. Don't do it. And the little girl glanced at her and smiled a little subtle, dimpling, wholly comprehending smile, and shook her head stubbornly at the glass. Brave girl, Eleanor thought. Wise, brave girl. While this is characterization for Eleanor, telling us about how she views conformity and also telling us about, like, the role of parents in her life, it's weird, though, right? Like, you'd think it's telling us a couple things. Like, I always talk about how dialogue should serve more than one function. It can ideally serve 3 or 4. And this is serving 3 or 4, but it seems like one of those might be that Eleanor is psychic? The line says, "Don't do it," Eleanor told the little girl. And then later we have, "Brave girl," Eleanor thought. In both cases, she's thinking these things, but it's as if the girl can hear them, because she looks over with a comprehending smile, and so it's almost like she's psychic. As she approaches Hill House, she pauses and looks at the side of the road. There are beautiful trees, oleanders, these things, and they seem so magical that she thinks that beyond them must be a garden full of fairies. Oleanders are poisonous, and so she's thinking that they must protect the fairies from predators, and that one day she'll come and she'll break the magic spell and get to go and meet the fairies in this magical garden. As she approaches the house, she thinks about how funny it is that her sister has probably discovered by this point that she stole the car. By now, they would surely know that she had taken the car and gone, but they would not know where. They would be telling each other incredulously that they would never have suspected it of Eleanor. I would never have suspected it of myself, she thought, laughing still. Everything is different. I am a new person, very far from home. In delay there lies no plenty, present mirth hath present laughter. And she gasped as the car cracked against a rock, and reeled back across the road with an ominous scraping somewhere beneath, but then gathered itself together valiantly, and resumed its dogged climb. So this part has Eleanor stating the lyrics to a song from Shakespeare's Twelfth Night. The song is called O Mistress Mine, and the entire song goes...
O mistress mine, where are you roaming? Oh, stay and hear your true love's coming, that can sing both high and low. Trip no further, pretty sweeting, journey's end in lovers' meeting. Every wise man's son doth know. What is love? 'Tis not hereafter. Present mirth hath present laughter. What's to come is still unsure. In delay there lies no plenty. Then come kiss me, sweet and 20. Youth's a stuff will not endure.
Eleanor having this song come to mind as she gleefully thinks about how out of character she's being tells us more than the literal words that she's saying. This is why investigating allusions is important, because the song starts, Mistress mine, where are you roaming? This is a love song from a man to a woman. Eleanor is a woman. So in Hill House, it's interesting that she doesn't sing the line, where are you roaming? Because it's fitting for her present situation. She is a long way from home. She has traveled. So why wouldn't she think this line? The next few lines are about the idea of if you're traveling and you fall in love with someone you meet along the way, then you stop there and that ends your journey. This actually reminds me of Felix the Shark, the FNAF story, where there's a town, it's called Fork Stop, because this guy was traveling through and he met a woman there and stayed at her motel overnight, and she made him just such good food that he decided to marry her, and so he settled the town there because the fork made him stop. So this idea is in Twelfth Night and Felix the Shark. In delay there lies no plenty, then can kiss me sweet and 20, youth's a stuff will not endure, means delaying will not make your life any better. Your youth will end, use it wisely. Eleanor lost her youth. She lost the last 10 or so years of her life taking care of her mother. So now, at age 32, she's going on a long road trip for herself. And as she sings, present mirth hath present laughter, which means the good things are right now. And the next line is, what's to come is still unsure. We should be thinking, what does that mean for what's about to happen to her? Because she doesn't get to sing that line because she almost crashes her car. Right before she gets to the part of the song that goes, the present is good, carpe diem seize the day, we don't know what's about to happen, she almost crashes her car. I think that there's actually a lot to learn here, but only by looking at the entire song can we determine what the part of the song that she doesn't sing says. The part of the song that she stops and doesn't say is about what's going to happen in the future. But we wouldn't know that unless we went and we looked up the song, or we just knew the song through cultural osmosis. This is why allusions to other texts are incredibly important to investigate, because by looking at the song from Twelfth Night, we can determine, well, maybe something will happen later in the story that makes it interesting that she says the line, I don't know what's about to happen, right before crashing her car. She finally arrives at the gates of Hill House. They're locked by a lot of chains and locks until she honks her horn. A man, a gardener/caretaker, comes, and she tells him that she's expected, she's a guest. And he says, nah, it can't be, there's no one here. And she's like, I am here, I'm a guest of Dr. Montague. And he says, nope, Dr. Montague's not here. She considers leaving, but instead doubles and triples down, saying that she's supposed to be here, and so finally he's like, okay, but I warned ya, and he unlocks the gate and lets her in. Eleanor thinks, Hill House, you're as hard to get into as heaven. Heaven, of course, often being depicted as having a gate that you have to be allowed through. So is Hill House like heaven? Is it like where you go when you die? As she drives through the gate, the gardener gives her a creepy smile and she gets scared, thinking as she drives up the driveway about seeing his scary face popping up in the trees in between bushes, accompanying her along like the Cheshire Cat. So, entering Hill House is like Wonderland. A different world, a strange world. Beyond this gate is Wonderland. Should we investigate Alice in Wonderland? Well, you should at least know the very specifics, where she sees a rabbit, it goes down a hole, she falls down the rabbit hole, she arrives in a different world, there's a bunch of crazy characters, the Cheshire Cat, the Mad Hatter, the Queen. There's also Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and the caretaker's name is Dudley, which makes me wonder if his name is a Tuckerized version of Tweedledee and Tweedledum. Okay, so a spoonerism is when you switch around, like, the sounds in a word, like Popedy's Nerfic. Popedy's Nerfic instead of Nobody's Perfect is a spoonerism. And a Tuckerism, or a Tuckerization, is when you name a fictional character after a real person. This is done all the time in Star Wars. And so if you take Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and you just kind of mess with the letters, Tweedledum, Dudley. I know Dudley's a real name, but, like, that's the kind of thing when you're like, oh, I need to come up with a name right now, and it's kind of like Wonderland. Tweedledumly. If anyone knows Shirley Jackson personally and has a time machine to go back in time before she died 5 years after this book was written, can you please ask her if my theory is correct? As Eleanor drives to calm herself, she sings, "Present mirth hath present laughter," again, and she thinks to herself that she just can't remember what the next line is. Because we're supposed to look it up and we're supposed to guess that maybe what happens next is something. That's the end of part 1 of the story. We now enter into part 2. Remember, Eleanor got here before Dr. Montague. That's what the groundskeeper Dudley told us. So she drives up to the house, and there's no other cars there. There's no signs of life. The house is scary, and she does not like it. She decides not to park directly in front of the house, because she wants the person who comes in after her to have the same experience. To also see the house is empty, and therefore scary. And she thinks if she has her car parked out front, it'll be too inviting. She approaches the house, she is not happy about it, and it was an act of moral strength to lift her foot and set it on the bottom step. And she thought that her deep unwillingness to touch Hill House for the first time came directly from the vivid feeling that was waiting for her. Evil, but patient. Journeys end in lovers' meeting, she thought, remembering her song at last, and laughed, standing on the steps of Hill House. Journeys end in lovers' meeting. And then she put her feet down firmly and went up to the veranda and the door. So she thinks it's ironic that the song goes, journeys end in lovers' meeting, and that what she's meeting at the end of the journey is Hill House. But it's a scary house, it's not a love house. Inside, she meets Mrs. Dudley. She's a bit ugly and she doesn't talk much. She takes Eleanor through the spooky house to her room and tells her that dinner is at 6, breakfast is at 9, and she leaves before dark and she won't clean their rooms. She repeats that the town is 6 miles away and no one lives any closer than the town. Eleanor, in her own head, mocks this warning, going, "Ooh, tee-hee, I'm scared. Mrs. Dudley, come help me in the dark." Yeah, right, as if I'd ever do that. And then she gets shivers down her spine. It's like that thing where, like, you get nervous or scared and, like, your hair sticks up on end and, like, your arm gets covered in those weird... I can't think of the word right now, I don't know. The house gives Eleanor very bad vibes. She unpacks and thinks about how her brand new slacks don't seem very new anymore in this house. And that is amazing writing. I love that. The house is so scary that my new pants don't even look new. Then she hears the door open downstairs. It is the other guest, Theodora. Theodora is also called Theo throughout the text, so I will be calling her Theo from now on. Eleanor helps her take her things upstairs. Her room is identical to Eleanor's, except Eleanor's is blue and Theo's is green. As they chit-chat and crack jokes, Mrs. Dudley repeats the exact same instructions word for word to Theo that she did to Eleanor, and it's a bit unsettling. It made me go, I wonder if she's like a ghost of the house and she has to just say the exact same things, word for word, syllable for syllable. She's just talking like a tape recorder and she doesn't even notice that Theo and Eleanor are speaking over her. It's funny on the surface, which also makes it scary. Like if this was a movie or a TV show, I could see it being played for laughs or for scares. Mr. Dudley at the gate apparently told Theo the same thing he told Eleanor, which is that she's not allowed to go up to the house, and she had to be persistent and ask to be let in. Why? We don't know why, but at the very least there's this creepy implication. Maybe it's that he doesn't want her to go up there because it's a scary house and it's haunted, or maybe him and his wife are both ghouls, both ghosts or poltergeists that haunt the grounds. We don't know, and we don't know where it's going to go, but just having strange people in the text makes it uncomfortable. Guys, did you know that one of the most beloved horror classics of the 20th century is like actually a good book? Crazy. The women decide to go and take a walk around the property, and they wonder if they are supposed to inform Mrs. Dudley when they're leaving the house. Keep in mind, this book was written and published in the late 50s, early 60s, so these characters are stepping into like a gothic manor house with servants, and for them, that would be basically as foreign as it is to us. You know, like if you were to step into like a castle and you start talking with a British accent like a Shakespeare person, because oh my god, it's just like that fictional stories that I hear about. That's the same to them too. They think that this is weird and silly, and so they're gonna act like Victorian maidens, like, oh, tee-hee, tea time. What are the rules? What are the ethics? And what are the manners? But like, in a half-kidding, joking, haha, wouldn't it be funny if we had to obey these rules type of way. Eleanor says that Mrs. Dudley will probably watch them wherever they go, because that's what she agreed to do. And Theo goes, agree to who? Count Dracula? We'll be talking about Dracula next story. The women go outside. Remember, there's no dwellings between Hill House and the town 6 miles from them, so the only thing around them are hills. So there's lots of room for running around like the sound of music, and they go through the hills and they wander around, and eventually they find a very pretty brook, and they sit and they make jokes, and it's a great time. It's like a fairy tale. Eleanor says it's like where a princess would meet a magical goldfish and she kisses it and it's actually a prince. And she and Theo have a fun time talking and making jokes, and then that quickly turns into trauma dumping, but still in a very fun way. They talk about their moms and growing up and things that they had to do and being embarrassing teenagers and being girls. And Theo goes, oh gosh, we're so similar, we must be cousins. And Eleanor sees something in the distance and freezes, and then Theo looks over and goes, what is that? It's scary, we're the reader and we're scared. And turns out it's a bunny. And Theo goes, oh, it's a bunny. It's so silly that we were scared of a bunny, Eleanor. And then they decide that they're going to go back inside because it's getting dark. And Eleanor says the thing that she's been worried about this whole time, which is that she doesn't think she can actually stay in this house the entire summer. And Theo goes, you can't let them separate us. We're cousins. As in, we're in this together. Chapter 3. They return to the house and Luke is there. Remember that Luke is the loser nephew of the house's owner, and when she sees him, Eleanor can't help but think, journeys end in lovers meeting. But she's not actually attracted to him, so I think that this is meant to imply that it's like ironic that she's like, oh, this is the part of the fairy tale where I would meet my love. And the only guy here is Luke. Luke explains who he is, invites them inside, and then they meet Dr. Montague, who also arrived while they were at the brook being scared by a bunny. The 4 of them stood, for the first time, in the wide, dark entrance hall of Hill House. Around them, the house steadied and located them. Above them, the hills slept watchfully. Small eddies of air and sound and movement stirred and waited and whispered. And the center of consciousness was somehow the small space where they stood, 4 separated people, and looked trustingly at one another. Call me crazy, but this passage from The Haunting of Hill House makes me think of the map from FNAF World. The setting is a living thing, it's a brain in FNAF World. They're being watched by the hills and the house. They're in the center of its consciousness. Call that theory Fazbear Hill House. There's a cute scene where they all introduce themselves. It's also an excuse to give physical descriptions of all the characters. I like it, and I think it's a good example of dialogue serving multiple purposes. In this case, telling us what's literally being said, characterizing the characters, giving them physical descriptions, and moving their relationships forward to where Eleanor thinks they're actually friends. and that's at least 4 different things going on, which is good. I'm going to read this passage. "Since we are all here," Luke said suddenly, as though there had been no pause in the conversation, "shouldn't we get acquainted? We know only names so far. I know that it is Eleanor here, who is wearing a red sweater, and consequently it must be Theodora who wears yellow. Dr. Montague has a beard," Theodora said, "so you must be Luke." "And you are Theodora," Eleanor said, "because I am Eleanor. And Eleanor," she told herself triumphantly, "who belongs, who is talking easily, who is sitting by the fire with her friends." "Therefore you are wearing the red sweater," Theodora explained to her soberly. "I have no beard," Luke said, "so he must be Dr. Montague." "I have a beard," Dr. Montague said, pleased, and looked around at them with a happy beam. "My wife," he told them, "likes a man to wear a beard. Many women, on the other hand, find a beard distasteful. A clean-shaven man, you'll excuse me, my boy, never looks fully dressed, my wife tells me." He held out his glass to Luke. "Now that I know which of us is me," Luke said, "let me identify myself further." I think that was quite endearing. They go on to play a little game of pretend, similar to the joking and the trauma dumping that Theo and Eleanor did earlier. I like how Eleanor, who hates her sister and brother-in-law and has no friends and spent 11 years taking care of her mother, meets people and goes, "Yep, these are my friends, these are my people, I'm one of them, I like them, I'm going to put my entire identity around them being my friends and being their friend, I'm going to do this forever." They have dinner, they make jokes about the Dudleys only staying on as the housekeepers so that they would hope they inherit it once the Sanderson family die. Luke is in the Sanderson family, so it's like him. He'd have to die. They laugh about there being secret treasure buried in the cellar, and the Dudleys having secret passageways all around the house. And Dr. Montague quashes this immediately. They were all saying it as a joke, but he makes sure that he's very serious in saying there are no secret passages, and there's nothing buried under the house. That tells us, the reader, that whatever's gonna happen, the mystery, the solution to the mystery is not a secret room or a secret hallway or one of those moving bookcases. He tells the group that he'll explain why they're all there in the morning. The last time someone tried to leave the house at night, their horse drove them into a tree on the driveway and they died. He's worried that if he tells them the truth about their mission, they'll want to leave, and he can't allow that because it's dark now. Luke, Theo, and Eleanor complain and say that they signed up to be here and they won't leave, they just want to know. And so, Dr. Montague, against his better judgment, tells them what they're doing there in Hill House. "You will recall," the doctor began, "the house described in Leviticus as leprous, Zarat, or Homer's phrase for the underworld, Ideodomos, the house of Hades. I need not remind you, I think, that the concept of certain houses as unclean or forbidden, perhaps sacred, is as old as the mind of man. Certainly there are spots which inevitably attach to themselves an atmosphere of holiness and goodness. It might not be too fanciful to say that some houses are born bad. Hill House, whatever the cause, has been unfit for human habitation for upward of 20 years. What it was like before then, whether its personality was molded by the people who lived here or the things they did, or whether it was evil from the start, are all questions I cannot answer. Naturally, I hope that we will all know a good deal more about Hill House before we leave. No one knows, even, why some houses are called haunted." Whenever we discuss FNAF, there's always the topic of Remnant and how it's different from Agony. Because Remnant sometimes is liquid metal, and Agony sometimes is black goo. But I think that there's an ethereal quality to them, or to Agony at least, which is based on general real-world notions of bad aura. Why is Hill House haunted? Agony. Maybe its personality was molded by the people who lived there or the things that they did. It's the abandoned asylum haunted trope because they tortured people there, etc. Fun fact, I have a video in my Absurd series about a real haunted house that is actually for real legally haunted. I will put that in the description of this video. It is a good one. You guys are not prepared for the shirt I'm wearing in that video and what my beard looks like. Dr. Montague tells them that he invited Theo because she's telepathic, and Eleanor because of the rocks hitting her roof, which he calls poltergeist activity. And Eleanor is like, "What? What happened? What are you talking about? The neighbors threw rocks at my roof." She is in denial about it. She spends the next minute in a panic, telling herself over and over, like, it was the neighbors. It wasn't a ghost. It was the neighbors. But Dr. Montague continues, the house was built 80 years ago. A rich man, his wife, and their 2 daughters moved in. But as his wife was coming up the driveway to see the house for the first time, her carriage overturned, killing her. They took her body inside. It is specified in the text that they immediately brought her body into the house immediately after she died. The man later remarried twice. One died from a fall, it is unspecified where the fall took place, and one died of an illness while in Europe, where the man then also stayed until he died. The 2 daughters grew up in the house, but after their dad died, they were sent off to live with an aunt. As they got older, the younger sister let the older sister keep the house, because the older sister was single. She then hired help from the town, and took in a younger woman to be her companion. This could mean numerous things. We can only guess why an unmarried woman would have another woman living with her in the house. It could mean anything. This is 1960. I mean that both in the case of when this event is taking place, it's the 1930s and 40s, so if they are in a relationship, that can't be public, and also this book was written in the 60s, so if there is supposed to be any amount of lesbianness, it would have to be not very direct. Wonder if that's going to come up later with a different character. The older sister dies and then leaves the house to her companion. The younger sister says, no, it's our house equally, you're dead, so it's mine now. There's a lawsuit and the companion wins. And so the younger sister spends years physically attacking and damaging the reputation of the companion. The people in town take the sister's side. They're sure that the companion pulled some sort of trick to get the older sister to sign the house over to her as she was dying. Why would someone leave a house just to a companion? Just to a friend of the same gender who lived in the area? People also think maybe she murdered the older sister in order to get the house. The companion became so paranoid because the younger sister kept threatening her, the townspeople hated her, and some people called her a murderer, that she ended up killing herself. And the townspeople thought this was an admission of guilt, that the feeling of guilt for killing the older sister caught up to her, and they never reflected on the torment that they put on her that drove her to do it. They were the heroes. The companion's cousins, the Sandersons, then inherited the house. That is Luke's family. He is now the nephew of the woman who inherited it from the companion, from the older sister, from the rich father. Luke's family moved into the house and then moved out a couple days later. Since then, no one has inhabited the house for more than a few days, because the house is evil. Everyone goes to sleep, Theodora keeps the lights on, Eleanor somehow has a good night's sleep, everyone wakes up recharged and rested better than the day before. In fact, Eleanor says that that's the best rest she's had since her mom died. The women meet the men in the dining room, and the men say that they left doors open from the bedrooms to the dining room so the women could find their way in the maze-like doors of the house. But the doors all kept closing on their own. Previously, they'd thought of maybe obtaining door stops to keep all the doors open, but now they're considering nailing the doors open. This is a joke, but they also consider putting up signs to denote dead ends. This is less of a joke. Theodora wonders why she can't see the library tower from her bedroom window. It seems like it should be in perfect view out her window. Dr. Montague then says he's been waiting for one of them to ask a question like this. He explains, "Have you not wondered at our extreme difficulty in finding our way around? An ordinary house would not have had the 4 of us in such confusion for so long, and yet time after time we choose the wrong doors. The room we want eludes us. Old Hugh Crane expected that someday Hill House might become a showplace, like the Winchester House in California. Every angle is slightly wrong. Hugh Crane must have detested other people and their sensible, squared-away houses, because he made his house to suit his mind. Angles which you assume are the right angles you are accustomed to, and have every right to expect are true, are actually a fraction of a degree off in one direction or another. The doorways are all a very little bit off-center. That may be, by the way, the reason the doors swing shut unless they are held. Of course, the result of all these tiny aberrations of measurement adds up to a fairly large distortion in the house as a whole. Theodora cannot see the tower from her bedroom window because the tower actually stands at the corner of the house. From Theodora's bedroom window, it is completely invisible, although from here it seems to be directly outside her room. The window of Theodora's room is actually 15 feet to the left of where we are now. Theodora spread her hands helplessly. "Golly," she said. I'm glad the book called attention to it, because reading through their difficulties of navigating the house, I thought it was probably based on the Winchester house. You've probably heard the family name Winchester, the gun manufacturers of the Winchester rifle, among many other types of guns. When Winchester died, his widow became very wealthy, and she designed a house that was very peculiar. Some sections were torn down and then rebuilt again, and we're going to go into the history of the house in a second, but you've likely heard of it because of its urban legend place in popular culture. So between lots of reconstruction and the fact that the house was damaged and then rebuilt, there were portions of it where you would open a door and it would lead to nowhere because they didn't bother rebuilding that room. There would be a staircase going up to nothing. Windows that open to brick walls. Now, that's the true story, but it's not often the true story that things like this are alluding to. It's the folk stories and the urban legends. The urban legend is that Sarah Winchester was haunted by the spirits of every man ever killed with a Winchester gun, and so she made the house a labyrinth on purpose so the ghosts could never catch her. And I think it's this notion that inspired Hill House as a house with a labyrinth of rooms that's haunted, which is why Dr. Montague calls it out by name in this passage of the book. The truth of the Winchester house doesn't matter. The urban legend is what persists and gets referenced in future pieces of art. The characters walk around the house and they find a room with a life-sized large statue. The book does this thing where the characters are all guessing at what the statue's of, and so they're all giving their own subjective interpretations, but we never see the objective description of what the statue actually looks like. We only hear what they think it is, and we only sometimes hear stories, little stories that they're making up about the actual topic that they're discussing. So the statue has either 3 or 4 figures. It's made of marble, and at the center is a naked man. Eleanor covers her eyes, and Theodora goes, "Good heavens," when they see it. Dr. Montague says he thinks that it's a reference to the Venus de Milo. Luke thinks it's St. Francis healing the lepers, and the other 3 figures on the statue are the 3 lepers. Theodora thinks the man in the center is Hugh Crane, he constructed the house. The 2 nymphs, as she calls them, are his daughters, and the person off to the side is the eldest daughter's young female companion. Eleanor thinks it's a dragon. They go to the nursery next. There's a spot in the room, or in the hallway outside the room, that's inexplicably cold. They think it can't possibly be a draft, because none of the windows or the doors stay open, and it feels too cold to just be a draft. After they all step through it, Luke notices 2 busts, 2 heads, facing in different directions in the hallway, and it seems like the spot that's cold is exactly where their eye lines would meet up. Nursery with 2 heads, is this possibly the sisters and their ghosts making it really cold? Is it a coincidence and they're just kind of tricking themselves into thinking this is creepy? We don't know, we only know their interpretation of what's going on. That night, Eleanor is awakened by knocking sounds. Half asleep, she thinks it's her mother, pounding on her door. But then, as she comes into greater consciousness, she remembers that her mother is dead and she's at Hill House. The knocking continues and she hears Theo calling to her from her room next door. She goes and she sits at the foot of Theo's bed. They hear the knocking on the door continue. It seems to be going up and down the hallway, going to each door in procession. Then it gets unnaturally cold. They think surely the men have left their rooms to go and investigate the knocking. The banging gets louder and louder as it approaches Theo's room. It sounds like an iron pot slamming against the door. They hear the men's voices, but not outside in the hallway. They're downstairs. They aren't here, which means the women have to face whatever this is alone. Eleanor runs over and barricades the door with her arms and screams, "Go away!" And then the banging stops. She retreats to Theo's bed and then they wait. Eleanor says that she's gonna peek out to see what's outside, and then we get a jump scare. And by a jump scare, I mean the banging comes back and it's even louder than ever. They're smashing on the top of the door. It's taller, it's higher up than even either of the men could possibly reach. Whatever is outside is tapping all over the door, turning the knob, but thankfully it's locked. Eleanor thinks that the cold is even scarier than the knocking. They yell at it, saying that it won't be able to get in, and it just bangs even louder, and now the door is shaking off its hinges. Then they hear a little giggle like a child. And then they hear the men running up the stairs, and suddenly all the noise stops. The men enter the room and they swap stories. The women tell them about the knocking and the coldness, and Dr. Montague says that he saw a dog run past his door. He and Luke ran outside to chase it, but all of the doors were closed, meaning the dog must have been a ghost. One of the scary stories to tell in the dark that we didn't discuss is about a dog that appeared at the top of a set of stairs every night. It would then go down the stairs and vanish on the landing. But we did read some stories and scary stories to tell in the dark about knocking on doors at night. This book from the 60s is playing on those ghost story tropes, the same way that Five Nights at Freddy's is in the modern day. Dr. Montague says that he's worried. The dog led him and Luke outside, and then when they came back, they couldn't hear the banging on the door that the women could hear. So whatever this entity is, it's purposefully separating them. End of chapter 4. We're halfway through the book and it's been very spooky. The next morning, everyone is in an inexplicably good mood. Eleanor is happier than she's been in a very long time, and there's also the slightest of implications that she's kind of falling for Luke a little bit, but also not really. She basically just keeps thinking, journeys end in lovers meeting, and then the next line is Luke doing something. So it's not Eleanor thinking, I'm in love with Luke. It's the book telling us that what she's meeting is Luke, and oh my gosh, Luke, lover, the journey's gonna end there? I don't know. At breakfast, Dr. Montague mentions 3 haunted locations while thinking about how happy he is that Hill House is actually haunted. He's been proven right. Ghosts, or at least hauntings, exist. He mentions the Bailchin House, Borley Rectory, and Glamis Castle. And these are important because the Bailchin House is about a ghost dog. So now let's look into the history of these 3 very real haunted locations. The Bailchin House is in Scotland. It was thought to be haunted, so a paranormal investigator invited some people, including journalists, to come and watch the investigation. When Shirley Jackson was writing Hill House, she said that she did deep dives into a lot of haunted house research, so it's very likely that Bailchin is one of the things she looked into that went on to inspire the book, which is why she calls it out by name here. In the book Mystical Scotland by Anne Lindsay, published in 1994, she spends 2 pages on the house and the woman who investigated it, whose name was Ada Freer. She was a psychic investigator. Miss Freer and the Bailchin investigation. The hauntings first came to light during the ownership of the Major Robert Stewart, who had retired from the East India Company in 1850. He never married and was regarded as an eccentric because of his excessive fondness of dogs, of which he kept a large number, and his belief in spiritual return. It was locally said that he himself had declared that he would return to haunt Bailchin after his death, probably in the form of a black spaniel, of which he was particularly fond, and this could have been the reason that all his 14 dogs were shot after his death. Malicious local talk also linked his name with that of his young housekeeper, Miss Sarah Nicholson, who died at Bailchin on the 14th July 1873 at the age of 27 and was buried there. Major Stewart arranged that his body was to be buried adjacent to hers upon his own death. When a priest was staying in the house, he noticed that there were some creepy things, like a vision of a crucifix coming to him, and so a psychic investigator, Ada Freer, convinces the owner of the house to allow her to come and investigate. Her record became the book The Alleged Haunting of B House, and eventually the blueprint for a well-known book written by Harry Price, The Most Haunted House in England. Miss Freer and her associates strongly believed in the haunting of the house, and produced all sorts of evidence to prove that doors had holes knocked into them mysteriously overnight, and many types of strange noises were heard. But the scandal caused by the book, which alluded to Major Stewart's relationship with his housekeeper, the collusion of Lord Bute, and the eccentricity of Miss Freer, who stuck to her story for the rest of her life, only served to ridicule the entire story. There's actually an entire book on Freer called The Strange Story of Ada Goodrich Freer by Trevor H. Hall, which was published in 1980, so a couple years before the one we just read. It was written because he and others believed that Ada actually plagiarized some folklore stories, and so it goes through the entire ordeal with the Bailchin house, and how it's a load of baloney. He writes about the owner of the house and how he loved dogs and thought he'd come back to life as a dog, and that the house was haunted by a dog. A black dog a white-haired priest, and a woman in white were apparently the ghosts seen in the house over a period of time. Like many houses of its kind, and especially Borley Rectory, it enjoyed a slight and merely local reputation of being haunted, until scandalmongers and psychical researchers began to interest themselves in it. Although according to the biographer of the father, the ghosts of Belchin were variously described as those of a big black dog, an old white-haired priest, and a woman in white. The later story of the Wicked Major with which Miss Freer regaled the investigators was more detailed and exciting. Major Robert Stewart retired from the service of the East India Company in 1850. 16 years later, he had inherited Belchin House on the death of his father. He never married. He was regarded as an eccentric because of his excessive fondness for dogs, of which he kept a large number at Belchin, and his belief in spirit return. It was said that he frequently declared that he would haunt Belchin after his death, probably in the form of a black spaniel, of which he was particularly fond. It was alleged that this was the reason why all 14 dogs belonging to Major Stewart were killed after his death.
I don't want to hear any stories where a dog dies and is a ghost. It's got my hair standing on end.
Don't worry, Clifford, I can't imagine we'll be reading any stories about dogs dying in haunted houses in our project about Tales from the Pizzaplex. I like that this book called out Borley Rectory, something that Dr. Montague in the story just also called out. It sees us linking these real-world things together to understand why Dr. Montague in the fictional story would also link them together. I also think it's funny that his whole book is accusing Freer of plagiarism, and then we read this other book written by someone a couple years later. We read the Mystical Scotland book, and it's almost word-for-word copied from Hall's book. So the Borley Rectory is the story of a monk and a nun who had an affair. The monk was executed, and the nun entombed in the brick walls alive. People started seeing haunted stuff in the house. And years later, people went, actually, there's absolutely no record of this nun and this monk ever existing or dying, so it's probably completely made up. But that part doesn't matter. The part that matters is the story of a nun being bricked into the wall and then haunting the entire place, especially since Shirley Jackson, writing this in the 50s, wouldn't have known that. So we have a story about a house that's haunted because someone is in the walls. And finally, Glamis Castle. There's an article about it in Smithsonian Magazine. It's a Scottish castle where there was rumored to be a child or a vampire hidden in the walls, out of sight, leading to the notion that it has secret rooms. The story was, and is, that in the castle of Glamis is a secret chamber. In this chamber is confined a monster, who is the rightful heir to the title and property, but who is so unpresentable that it is necessary to keep him out of sight and out of possession. The real records show that there was a child born who died a couple days later, but the rumor is that he was born disfigured and ugly, a monster like a human toad, and so they kept him in the walls so no one would know that he lived there. So in short, haunted locations that have some sort of extra secret rooms, there's one with a ghost dog, and Dr. Montague is talking about them because he's so happy that he's proven that haunting exists. He says that he feels like food has a new flavor to it. The four characters discuss how, despite being scared last night, today they feel totally fine. Dr. Montague says that there was no real danger, that ghosts, if they are real, have never harmed a human before. He says that the conscious mind is invulnerable. Right now they aren't scared, and none of them truly think it's a ghost. It's only in a semi-conscious state that they're vulnerable to the ideas of a ghost attacking them. There was something there last night, but it wasn't a real ghost. Dr. Montague then mentions poltergeists. He references the Oscar Wilde story, The Canterville Ghost. He's referencing how poltergeists and ghosts are different things. A ghost, a human spirit left on Earth, would never hurt someone, so if they are being harmed by something, it's not a ghost. When Dr. Montague mentions the Canterville Ghost, Theodora goes like, "Oh yeah, I know that story, of course," and then they move on. And the presumption there is that Jackson expects the reader to also be familiar with the story. Of course we're looking into it now. The Canterville Ghost is the 1887 story by Oscar Wilde about an American minister named Otis buying a manor from Lord Canterbury, who lives there, and tells him that it's haunted. He says that Americans don't believe in ghosts. If ghosts existed, they would be paraded about in America, tickets would be sold to go and see the silly ghost, they'd be in roadshows and museums, and that's why Americans don't believe in the supernatural. It's only silly Europeans that think things like that are possible. The story is actually very, very funny. It's from the perspective, and it tells the story of these Americans. Their oldest son's name is Washington, and their two younger sons are called Stars and Stripes. The entire thing is commentary on the way that, Americans are so different than us Europeans. When the family enters the manor for the first time, the house lady points out that there's a blood stain on the wooden floor, and that's because that's where one of the previous owners stabbed and killed his wife. People used to come from all over to come and see the blood stain on the floor, and that's all the evidence that the house is haunted. And the moment she points this out to them, Washington, the oldest son, gets down and scrubs it off with patented American stain remover to fix the floor. So you have this story where, like, these British people are like, and this is the spot where 500 years ago something went down and we revere it as this sign of, and then American goes, oh, I can take this off with my patented house cleaner. And the moment he does this, lightning strikes outside and the housemate faints. And the Americans are like, tut tut, British weather, it's always raining all the time. The next day they wake up and the blood is back. They wonder if it's a ghost, but then move on quickly and spend all of dinner talking about how America is better than everywhere else. They go to bed, but then at 1 a.m, Otis is awoken by a strange noise. He leaves his bedroom to check, and he sees a ghost with burning eyes, rattling his chains around in the hallway outside his bedroom. And Otis looks at him and goes, hey man, I got some oil lubricant. You can put them on those chains so they won't rattle around as much. Please do that. Here's my candle. You can take this. You can apply it yourself. I'm going to go back to sleep. It's just like you're really bringing the vibe down here by rattling your chains. The ghost is annoyed by this, and he ponders what to do all night about these pesky Americans who aren't scared of him. The ghost knocks over a suit of armor in the middle of the night, and the twins come downstairs and start shooting him with BB guns. Otis points his revolver at him and tells him to put his hands up like a good Texan. And the ghost goes, boo, and flies through them. And he goes to the top of the stairs thinking he gave them a real fright, and he starts laughing maniacally. And then Mrs. Otis walks over, and she hands him some Tums and says, oh, you're making some weird, laughing sounds. You must have indigestion. Here, you can take these. Please stop making noises. I'm trying to sleep. He becomes so annoyed by the family that he does oil his chains so that he can walk around unbothered at night. One night he goes downstairs, and the twins are actually waiting for him there, and they yell boo, and they jump out at him, and they chase him, and then Washington traps him so he has to fly up the chimney, and he's so tormented and terrified by these darn Americans that the ghost now just stays in his own room. Now, Otis does have a daughter. Washington is the oldest, Virginia is the daughter, Stars and Stripes are the two twin youngest boys. A young duke starts staying with the family over the summer, and he is dating Otis's daughter. I'm just now realizing that Virginia is also an overtly American name because of the state of Virginia. Stars, Stripes, Washington, Virginia, I get it. Now, the young duke is British, and the ghost actually recalls scaring his great-grandfather years ago. And so he thinks that this boy is someone who he can actually scare. As he's plotting on doing this, Virginia walks up into his room. See, she got her dress dirty, and so instead of wanting to go in the front door, she comes in the back door, and so she comes through it and she sees the ghost sitting at his desk trying to plot how to scare the humans. She tells the ghost that she's sorry that her brothers treat him so poorly, and asks him if he wants a sandwich. He says, no thank you. She tells him that he should go to America, and he says no. She tells him that he's been very rude. See, she noticed that he started stealing all of her red paint, because every morning he repaints the blood onto the wooden floors, and the Americans erase it. And it's only Virginia that knows that it's actually just her paint. The ghost tells her that he wishes he could move on, but he can't, unless an innocent human cries for him and prays for him. And Virginia says, okay, I'll do it. And so the ghost leads her down a secret passage to a secret room, telling her that what she'll face inside will be difficult. Virginia isn't there for family dinner, and so everyone else in her family gets worried and they call the police and they ride horses all throughout town trying to find her. Hours and hours later, she comes down the stairs and says she has something to tell them. She goes and leads the family through a secret hallway to a back room, where there's a skeleton chained to the wall. This is where the man who had previously owned the house and had killed his wife was chained to the wall and tortured to the point where he became a ghost who haunted the house for several hundred years. Virginia prays before the skeleton, and outside a tree blooms, showing that the ghost has been let into heaven and has moved on. Before departing, the ghost gave Virginia a box of jewels. Lord Canterbury comes back into town for the funeral for the skeleton, because the skeleton man was his ancestor, that's how he ended up getting the house generations later. And Otis tries to give him the box of jewels, saying that they must be old family heirlooms. And Lord Canterbury refuses, saying that when they bought the house, they kept everything that should be inside it. When they bought the house, they also purchased the ghost, and because they had to deal with him, they should get the ghost's jewels. We also learned that Virginia was actually born in England when Mrs. Otis was in the country temporarily. This means that she's half British, and might be why she was able to talk to and befriend the ghost. Virginia then marries the Duke. The two then go through a stroll through the graveyard to the grave of the ghost. The Duke asks Virginia what happened when she was missing for all those hours with the skeleton, and she says that she'll never say, but that love is stranger than life or death, with the implication that she witnessed some sort of great acts of cruelty from the ghost. She saw the terrible things he'd done, and she had to come face to face with the angel of death, but that still she prayed for him and allowed him to move on. And the story ends with the Duke kissing her, asking if one day she'll tell their children. And the story ends with her blushing, because oh my god, that means that one day you and I as husband and wife might actually be intimate, and that's just too much for me. In the 1880s or whatever. This story is very funny and it read almost like an episode of Scooby-Doo. I read this story for the first time when I was a child, and I used to enjoyed it a lot. Now I've grown up and the Canterville Ghost is still my favorite one. You must read it. This story is great. I read it in one period while at school. It was funny and lame, but I enjoyed it and I had fun reading it. Bah, I need to learn this story for my final exam, and it's so boring. Within the first few moments of reading the story, I was nearly asleep. Teachers shouldn't make students learn this stuff! Exclamation point, exclamation point. I liked it. The twins, they were awesome. And felt good for the ghost too, as in the end everything becomes good. Interesting book, the twins are just awesome. Those are reviews from the website that I read this on. Okay, so why did we read this? Dr. Montague is explaining that ghosts don't hurt people, but poltergeists do. And he asks the crew if they're familiar with the Canterville Ghost. And Theo laughs and says, yeah, those two American boys who tormented the ghost sure were kind of annoying. And Dr. Montague goes, yes, those boys are like poltergeists. They're driving out the ghost who ultimately is kind. So the ghost in Hill House is probably like the Canterville Ghost. He's knocking on the doors to scare them, but he won't actually harm them. It's not ghosts who are the real monsters. It's Americans. The group has breakfast, then go to their meeting room. They chill for a bit and then send Luke to get Mrs. Dudley to bring them coffee. The girls make plans to explore the yard, but quickly Luke comes back, telling them they have to follow him. They rush into the hallway and see that someone has written in chalk on the wall, and it says, "Help Eleanor come home." Eleanor is scared. Why is her name on the wall? Well, if you're me, you might be thinking that Luke was out there alone when this chalk appeared, so maybe he did it. Or maybe it's actually the ghost of her mother saying, Eleanor, I need help, please come home, I just died. There's multiple paranormal and totally explainable explanations for why this happened, and I like it. Eleanor asks Theo if she did this as a prank, and Theo says no, maybe you did it for attention. And the two of them start fighting, and from this point onward, their relationship is never the same. Different scenes will have them being best of friends or mortal enemies who hate one another. Eleanor tells Theo that she's not like her. Theo's an attention-seeking baby. Theo says that maybe the spirits of the dead girls like Eleanor because she's pathetic like them. And then the doctor breaks this fighting up. Theo apologizes for starting the argument, and Eleanor apologizes too, but she's not actually sorry. But she does admit that being frightened is probably what made her so emotional and caused the argument to escalate. The group then spends a couple hours in their rooms, each alone, just cooling off and spending time without the company of everyone else in the house. They write down their experiences in the house so far to give to Dr. Montague so he can use them for the book that he's writing. He tells them that his wife will be arriving on Saturday. It's currently Thursday, and they all comment how quiet the house has been. Eleanor goes upstairs, and as Theo opens her door, she screams. Eleanor rushes into Theo's room and sees the words, "Help Eleanor, come home Eleanor," in blood over Theo's bed. Theo's clothes are drenched in blood as well. Theo freaks out and tells Eleanor that she must have done this. She broke into her room and wrote on the wall and ruined all of her clothes. The men come in and calm Theo down and bring her into Eleanor's room, because they all refuse to go back into Theo's room. Eleanor now also has to share her clothes with Theo. Eleanor knows she didn't do it, but she keeps telling herself it's not blood on the wall, it's paint. Where would someone have even gotten blood? This is so scary, but, at least I know I didn't do it. So now everyone in the group is blaming each other. Theo thinks that Eleanor ruined her clothes and wrote on the wall to scare her, and Eleanor thinks someone else is playing a prank on her. Or also it could just be ghosts, but they're not allowing themselves to believe in ghosts, because would you? Would you just jump to the supernatural? We were just told that everyone spent hours alone in their own rooms. There is nothing practically stopping Theo from, in the hours that she's alone in her room, finding painting on her wall, getting her clothes all dirty, meeting everyone downstairs, hanging out for the evening, going back to her room, and pretending to find what she herself wrote in there. That is completely practically possible. So is that what happened and Theo's being a little naughty? Or is it a ghost? We, the reader, don't know. Now, why might Theo be doing this other than pranking Eleanor? And if she's pranking Eleanor, why? Well, now we need to talk about a very common interpretation of this text that I personally think is entirely intended. And that is that when Eleanor and Theo first meet, Theo mentions that she has a roommate who she got into a fight with. Eleanor asks if they're married, and Theo says no. Theo also always avoids using pronouns when discussing her partner. Nowadays, this kind of thing would be an incredibly cliche twist, hiding the twist gayness of the character by having them not specify the gender or sex of their partner. The reason that's cliche nowadays is because back in the 60s, Hill House just, did it. It's in this book because it was the 60s. Now remember, discussion of text is never validating the message in the text, and a text containing something does not mean that the author is actually saying that that's what they believe. It just could be reflecting a reality of the time period that it would take place in. Basically what I'm saying is, you could argue that the reason that Theo would have done this is so that now she has to share a room with Eleanor, as well as wear Eleanor's clothes. As the story goes on, it will be so heavily hinted that Theo has a thing for Eleanor, and so this would entirely be within her character. Noting that this is in the text does not reflect on us, the reader, and this being in the text does not reflect on Shirley Jackson, the author. It is just the person that Theo is in this fictional story, especially since this is a red herring. It's here to make us question if this character has ulterior motives, or if it's a ghost. While Eleanor is in her room that night with Theo, she notes that Theo is wearing red nail polish. Once again, strongly showing that Theo had the means, motive, and opportunity to write on the wall to frame Eleanor to make them now share a bedroom together. Later that night, they're in the lounge room, and Eleanor can't look at Theo without hating her and wishing she would die. But then when they speak, she's totally cordial. Luke and Theo and Dr. Montague all make little comments about Eleanor being silly, how she needs to be the center of attention and be so vain, which is showing us that those three possibly think Eleanor might be doing it. Or Eleanor is just uncharitably interpreting everything they're saying and internalize it as her being separated off from the main group. She's already worried and wondering about why her name is on the walls. So maybe it's giving her an uncharitable interpretation of the little comments the other guys are making, the little jokey jokes they're telling. She's internalizing it as serious criticism. After reading those stories about people being in the walls, it's making me wonder, could there literally be a ghost in the walls? Because it's on the walls that all this stuff is being written. So, could there be someone who is in the walls right now who's writing these messages to/for Eleanor, telling her to come home? Now, I don't literally think that's where the book is going, but it is something that once we learn what's actually happening, we should reinvestigate and see if maybe it's going to come true in a slightly different way than is implied by calling out these stories about the rectory where the nun is in the wall. That night, Eleanor is lying in the dark. She's clutching onto Theo, who's in the bed next to her. As she's trying to fall asleep, she hears a child giggling somewhere in the room. The giggling gets closer and closer, and Eleanor can't move. It's like she's completely frozen. She then realizes that they left the light on. They usually leave the lights on when they're going to sleep because it's so scary. So why is the room dark? Something isn't right. The giggle gets closer and closer. Eleanor and Theo squeeze each other's hands even tighter. The giggle is so close. It's a scream. It's coming. It's a child. It's a hurt child. Then suddenly the lights are on. Theo is nowhere near Eleanor. Eleanor jumps up and runs across the room to put her back against the wall so she can look around and protect herself from this child's scary, giggly ghost. But as she looks around the room with the lights on, she goes, "Wait, whose hand was I holding?" End of chapter. I loved that. It's like two different scary stories, right? It's the Johnny, I want my liver. It's the giggle getting closer and closer and then being right in front of you. And it's also the story where it's like, oh, I'm petting my dog, and then your dog's not really there. So what was I petting? Ooh. You know, the story of like there's a girl and she loves her dog and her dog is like her little protector. And so at night when she's scared, she reaches over and she pets the dog and the dog licks her hand. And then one night she's scared and so she reaches over and she pets the dog and it licks her hand and she hears a weird sound from outside. And so she gets scared and she pets the dog and it licks her hand. And then she hears some thud, thud, thuds, and then she pets the dog and it licks her hand. And then she hears some strange dripping sound from the bathroom. So she pets the dog and it licks her hand. And then she finally gathers the courage and she walks through her dark room into the hallway down to the bathroom. And she turns the light on in the bathroom and she sees that her dog is dead with a meat hook through it, dripping blood into the floor. And she's like, oh my god, that's so weird. And then she goes back into her bedroom and she sees written on the walls in blood, dogs aren't the only things that lick. And you go, that means the thing that she was petting and licking her hand was the monster the whole time. That's the story that we just read. That urban legend ghost story has now been in Hill House because it's reinterpreted and put into this fictional story, which is how Tales from the Pizzaplex works. Who up petting they dogs? Who up nunning they walls? Chapter 6 opens with Luke and Eleanor outside, together in this little garden area. They're trauma dumping, and Luke tells Eleanor that he never had a mother. Eleanor thinks about how much Luke annoys her, and then she keeps thinking about how journeys end in lovers meeting, and how him being her lover would be dumb, because he's kind of dumb. She doesn't like him, but he is like a young man, and like literally the only young man that she knows. And she kind of has it in her head, like, oh, wouldn't it be appropriate that like journeys end in lovers meeting? So like, is it fate, destiny? They go inside, they separate for a couple hours, they reconvene, and Luke tells them that he found a weird book that the creator of the house, Hugh Crane, made for his oldest daughter. He cut out and then pasted together different pictures and drawings from other books. There's scary paintings and etchings and stuff like that in the book, and he also wrote down some rules, and these are derived from biblical teachings like honor thy father and thy mother. But he really focuses on rules about the father and the relationship a daughter should have to her father. At one point, he says he hopes her daughter will be able to get into heaven to spend eternity with her father, by which he means himself. Not God, not the heavenly father, but him, her father. He also depicts the 7 deadly sins in images that he drew himself, and Eleanor is so disturbed that she refuses to look at the page for lust. But the doctor is astonished that this book was intended to be given to a child. The end of the book is signed in blood, and they all find it very disturbing. Hugh Crane was very clearly not a cool guy. That night, Theo makes a rude comment to Eleanor about Luke, asking if he'll be moving in with her once the summer is over, mocking her for potentially having a crush on Luke. Will Luke be coming over to Eleanor's house and drinking out of her star cup? See, Eleanor told Theo about the star cup from the little girl in the restaurant in the beginning where she would only drink milk out of her star cup, and so Eleanor's been using this sort of as a symbol of like, yeah, girl, that's like a unique thing about you. We all should have our star cups. And so when Theo says that, hey, is Luke gonna drink out of your star cup? It's like, ooh, it's getting a little steamy in here. But Eleanor is pissed about this, because she either doesn't like Luke, so doesn't like the implication, or is worried that she might like Luke even though he's an idiot. So she storms outside even though it's dark and scary, and she shouldn't be doing that, and Theo chases after her. I can't imagine why you think you have any right to interfere in my affairs. Her language formal to prevent a flood of recrimination, or undeserved reproach. I'm sure that nothing I do is of any interest to you. That's right, Theo said grimly. Nothing that you do is of any interest to me. So the subtext here is that Theo is gay and jealous that Eleanor might have a crush on Luke. We, the reader, don't know if Eleanor actually does, but she has thought about it, but also thinks that she hates him. The line, nothing that you do is of any interest to me, has a clear double meaning. It's overtly saying that she doesn't care about Eleanor's love life, which is an obvious lie because she's jealous, but the subtext is, nothing you do, men, is of any interest to me. And when I say do, I don't mean do in the way that we, like in the modern sense, would use it. I mean, like, the thing that you're interested in is not something I am interested in. I'm not interested in men the way that you are. And her actions in this chapter only really make sense if it's a romantic jealousy thing. This is Shirley Jackson telling us with subtext that Theo is gay and has a crush on Eleanor. The next section is amazing, and I could probably talk about it for an hour, but I swear I will not. So here's what we're reading. These two characters are angry at one another. Theo is gripping Eleanor as they walk through the darkness. They're subconsciously retracing their path back to the brook from the beginning of day 1, where they met and said that they should have a picnic. As part of her little digs about Luke, Theo asked Eleanor if he's going to move in with her and drink out of her star cup. And then this happens. Nothing irrevocable had yet been spoken, but there was only the barest margin of safety left them, each of them moving delicately along the outskirts of an open question. And once spoken, such a question as "Do you love me?" could never be answered or forgotten. They walked slowly, meditating, wondering, and the path sloped down from their feet and they followed, walking side by side in the most extreme intimacy of expectation. Their fainting and hesitation done with, they could only wait passively for resolution. Each knew, almost within a breath, what the other was thinking and wanting to say. Each of them almost wept for the other. In this case, the word fainting is kind of like when you're fighting and you kind of like, oh, you like go in a direction like you're dodging. So what they're saying is they're sort of having this, they both know what the other person is thinking, but the words are left unsaid. And the comparison the passage uses is like asking someone if they love you. It's something that, even if you don't answer the question, you're still answering the question. And it's the kind of thing that no matter what your answer is, it changes the nature of your relationship forever. So your relationship isn't changed by answering such a question. Your relationship is changed by asking such a question. And so our interpretation here would be that that's not just an example of such a question, that that's literally what they're actually avoiding discussing. The question Eleanor wants to ask is if Theo is jealous of her because Theo is in love with Eleanor. And the question Theo wants to ask Eleanor is, would you give me a chance? And they're both sad for the other one, because they each know what the other person's answer would be. Eleanor knows that Theo would say, yes, I am in love with you. And Theo knows that Eleanor would say, no, I'm not interested. And to drive this home, Jackson uses the word intimacy. So that's the subtext of that passage, which, unless you're interpreting Theo as having feelings for Eleanor, doesn't really make sense or have an explanation. They keep walking, and they seem to walk through this weird, otherworldly thing. The trees in the path turn white, and the sky turns dark. It's like a weird fantasy land. They walk forward, and they end up in a garden. Things are now no longer white and dark, but like a real garden in the daytime with a picnic. It's like they've walked into a scene, a fantasy scene, through a different, time. It's like Alice in Wonderland, or Narnia, or The Wizard of Oz, where things are in color now for some reason. Something supernatural is happening, and because what they're stumbling on is a picnic, we know it's in some way related to the thing that they discussed on their first day of meeting, that they want to have a picnic by the brook. And they've now walked toward the brook, fallen into a different dimension, and are seeing a picnic. They could hear the laughter of the children and the affectionate, amused voices of the mother and father. The grass was richly, thickly green. The flowers were colored red and orange and yellow. The sky was blue and gold. And one child wore a scarlet jumper and raised its voice again in laughter, tumbling after a puppy over the grass. There was a checked tablecloth spread out, and, smiling, the mother leaned over to take up a plate of bright fruit. Then Theodora screamed. "Don't look back!" she cried out in a voice high with fear. "Don't look back! Don't look! Run!" Running without knowing why she ran, Eleanor thought that she would catch her foot in the checked tablecloth. She was afraid she might stumble over the puppy. But as they ran across the garden, there was nothing except weeds growing blackly in the darkness. And Theodora, screaming still, trampled over the bushes where there had been flowers, and stumbled, sobbing, over half-buried stones and what might have been a broken cup. Eleanor doesn't see anything scary here, so is confused why they're running. It's just a family. But one of the children is wearing a red jumper. When all of Theo's clothes got ruined, she had to wear Eleanor's. And the thing that this book continually points out is that she has a red sweater. Eleanor's red sweater keeps getting mentioned. And so this child wearing a red sweater is like she's wearing Eleanor's clothes. And this scares Theo. As they run away, they pass over a broken cup. and we just were reminded about the Star Cup, which is symbolic of Eleanor's childhood or her intimacy or just like some aspect of herself that she would share with people, like her life or her love, etc. But now the cup is broken. So what Theo is seeing here is a mother, a father, and 2 kids having a picnic, the thing that she wanted to have with Eleanor, a picnic, and a child is wearing a hand-me-down of Eleanor's. This is Eleanor with her future husband and her children having the thing that Theo wants. And that's why it's a husband and children, because it's the thing that Theo won't have. If Eleanor goes down that path, if Eleanor is straight and becomes a mother, Theo can't be with her. And so now this is the broken cup of the potential of her and Eleanor being together. That's why it is scary to Theo. This is why she pulls Eleanor away before she can realize what they're actually looking at, that it's a potential future for Eleanor that Theo doesn't want to happen. I have found basically no discussion of this online that comes to a satisfactory conclusion. I don't know and can't know exactly what this is saying, and I don't know why Theo would want to pull Eleanor away from it if it's not basically what I just laid out. The repetition of the red sweater that Eleanor has and then the one that this child is wearing makes me think that that is how we're supposed to link these 2 things together. I certainly think that the broken cup is going back to the Cup of Stars because, like, when else is a cup mentioned in this entire book? It's obviously the Cup of Stars. But what exactly does that mean in this context? Now, I googled this because I wanted to see what other people had to say about it, and I found this. My interpretation was that there was no reason for a family and a picnic to be there, since Hill House is so isolated, and thus whatever it is that they're seeing is not real. I did actually find an interpretation where someone thought that this was Theo's childhood and that she's the one in red, but then, like, we don't know why this is something that she would be pulling Eleanor away from. We don't ever learn what this would actually have been, so I do still like my explanation, but let me know what you guys think in the comments. Who up starring they cup? I don't know, that's not in the script, I don't know why I keep saying that. So they run back to the house, and Luke and Dr. Montague rush over to them and say, "We've been looking for you for hours." But it hasn't been hours to Eleanor and Theo. This is so weird. It's kind of like the Canterville Ghost. "We've been nearly crazy," the doctor said, worn. "We've been out looking for you for hours." "It was a picnic," Eleanor said. She had fallen into a kitchen chair and looked down at her hands, scratched and bleeding and shaking without her knowledge. "We tried to get out," she told them, holding her hands out for them to see. "It was a picnic. The children." Theodora laughed in a little continuing cry, laughing on and on thinly, and said through her laughter, "I looked back. I went and looked behind us," and laughed on. "The children. And a puppy." "Eleanor." Theodora turned wildly and put her head against Eleanor. "Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor." And, holding Theodora, Eleanor looked up at Luke and the doctor, and felt the room rock madly, and time, as she had always known time, stop. I think the way that time passed differently for the women compared to the men during their little trip to the picnic, as well as now when time seems to stop, are related to something. And I think it's that the thing they saw at the picnic was the future. It all has to do with the way that time is passing. And that was the end of the chapter. It is now Saturday, and this adventure is never mentioned again. Whatever analysis can be done for the picnic scene needs to be done now, which is why I'm confident in my answer. Mrs. Montague is supposed to arrive on Saturday. She arrives after dark, after dinner, and is upset that they ate without her. Dr. Montague says that they were worried that she wasn't coming, and she goes, "Well, I said I was coming today, and here I am." She's very annoying. She demands the most haunted room, which they all decide is the nursery. She's brought her driver with her to stay with them in the house. His name is Arthur, and he wants to put the car around back, but everyone tells him not to go outside after dark. Mrs. Montague thinks this is nonsense. Ghosts are friendly. We shouldn't be scared of them. She criticizes her husband for not testing the ghosts by doing things like automatic writing, which is when you get a pen and you start to write because you're just letting the ghost possess your hand. This is just called being in the flow state, but some people think it's ghosts. Other kinds of automatic writing include taking a planchette, which is like the thing if you're doing a Ouija board that like moves around, but you'd put a pen into the planchette until you're like, ooh, we're going to hold it and it's going to draw letters. So there's multiple different kinds of automatic writing, but basically it's a ghost takes over and is able to spell stuff out. My examination into the true haunted house, the Ghost of Nyack, talks about automatic writing, so I will once again be plugging this amazing video. Go and watch it, please. Theo and Eleanor are like, oh golly, I sure do feel bad for Dr. Montague if this is his wife. And Eleanor is like, oh yeah, they called Luke a coward for not going outside, and like, he is a coward, so are they really that wrong? And Theo goes, well, yeah, but you know, he never had a mother. And this is implying to us, the reader, that Theo was spying on Luke and Eleanor earlier when he divulged that information to Eleanor. That night in the library, they do automatic writing. Mrs. Montague says the spirits are telling her about a nun and a monk. And Dr. Montague says there is no nun. There's never been a nun here. There's none here. But Mrs. Montague keeps interrupting him, keeps demeaning him, telling him that automatic writing works and thus there must be a nun. And you can feel his frustration because clearly he's been focusing scientifically on all of their investigations, and automatic writing isn't scientific. There is absolutely no way of proving if it's real or fake. Arthur, the driver, suggests that the house might have been built over a previous location, and on that previous location, there may have lived a nun. But there's literally no reason to think this, and Dr. Montague gets frustrated. Mrs. Montague says that she believes the nun's name was Helen, or Helene, or Elena, and that most likely she got walled up for breaking a vow. Hey wait, that's the Borley Rectory story! The one about the nun in the wall that you, the reader, are supposed to be aware of, which is why the book mentioned it earlier. So that if you did know it, you'd understand what they're referencing now, and if you didn't know it, you could just look it up. Which means in-universe, Mrs. Montague is just stealing the backstory to an actual haunted house, which I think is funny and frustrating. This is just frustrating. I dare say she was walled up alive, Mrs. Montague said. The nun, I mean. They always did that, you know. You've no idea the messages I've had from nuns walled up alive. There is no case on record of any nun ever being— John, may I point out to you once more that I myself have had messages from nuns walled up alive? Do you think I am telling you a fib, John? Or do you suppose that a nun would deliberately pretend to have been walled up alive when she was not? Is it possible that I am mistaken once more, John? Certainly not, my dear, Dr. Montague sighed wearily. No nun was ever walled up alive, the doctor said sullenly. He raised his voice slightly. It is a legend, a story, a libel circulated— All right, John, we won't quarrel over it. You may believe whatever you choose. Just understand, however, that sometimes purely materialistic views must give way before facts. Now, it is a proven fact. So she's saying that because she's talked to these nuns, it is a fact that they've happened, and that even though he has his beliefs, he's got to know deep down that his silly beliefs are secondary to the fact that she has talked to ghosts, and it makes me frustrated, and I'm not even married to her. The main characters continue to be annoyed, and Mrs. Montague insists that they all listen to what the ghost told her. She starts to read her conversation with the nun, the ghost that's haunting Hill House, which, again, nonsense. She asked it questions, and it answered. The ghost told her Nell, 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 which is the nickname that Theo calls Eleanor. Theo and Eleanor look at each other like, ooh, that's not good. The ghost writes, home, want to be home, mother, lost, home. So the writing on the wall is about the ghost wanting Eleanor to come home, and now, unless Dr. Montague has told Mrs. Montague about the writing on the wall, she has somehow come to the conclusion that what the ghost would be saying was, Nell, come home, the exact thing that was being written on the walls, and that the message is probably from her mother. Mrs. Montague makes a comment about how direct the ghost was being. This was a much more clear signal than any of the other times she's done automatic writing, and that's because the other time she was doing automatic writing was fake and baloney. But this is real. She was actually talking to the ghost. That night, Arthur says he will patrol the house. He's gonna check upstairs every hour. He also has a gun. Mrs. Montague goes to the nursery to sleep, and Dr. Montague hurries the women and Luke into his room. He says he's worried that Arthur might accidentally shoot someone were the ghost to start haunting them and spooking him, so they're all going to stay in the same room and look out for one another and not separate. He's worried that something will happen that night, that there will be another ghost and then the door slams right in front of them. Knocking starts happening on all the doors down the hallway, just like it did on the previous night. Dr. Montague is worried his wife will do something stupid. The door almost bursts off its hinges as the knocking continues, and then it fades and they hear it approaching the nursery. It becomes intensely cold. Eleanor hears crashing, like the library tower is collapsing and the room is dark and she starts falling through a void of darkness and then she blinks and it's morning. It's daylight outside, no one else seems to have had the experience that she just did other than the knocking and the shaking. Dr. Montague calmly says it's breakfast time. Nothing happened. They talk to Mrs. Montague and Arthur. Arthur says he didn't hear a peep last night, even a mouse. Later in the day, Eleanor tells Theo that when this project is over, she wants to move in with her. Theo says no. Eleanor says that she doesn't want to go home, she wants to move in with Theo. And Theo says no, this was just a summer unspoken fling. Remember, Theo has a roommate, but she's been fighting with that roommate. Eleanor says, too bad. When you leave in your car, I'm just going to follow you. Theo says no again. But Eleanor really does not want to go home. I wonder if it's because the ghost keeps telling her to go home. And I wonder if this will have some sort of sense of irony at the end of the story. Luke starts talking about how Hill House sometimes feels like a mother. Theo tells Eleanor that she will not be coming to stay with her and to drop it. She suggests that they go to the brook to clear their minds, but Eleanor doesn't want to. She's angry. Luke says that he'll accompany them to scare away any rabbits. Eleanor still doesn't want to. Luke asks Theo why Eleanor is being so weird. Theo says that she wants to move in with her, but the answer is no. Luke laughs, and he sings, "Journeys end in lovers meeting." What a coinky-dink! As they walk to the brook, Luke calls Hill House a mother house again. Eleanor then lore drops, telling us that she believes that she killed her own mother. Her mother needed medicine and knocked on the wall, but Eleanor was asleep and didn't hear her. Knocked while Eleanor was asleeping, you say? On the wall, you say? The house is like a mother, you say? Theo and Luke are walking and talking and whispering, and Eleanor asks if they're talking about her, and they say no. She decides that if she keeps pressing the matter, it'll be a bit embarrassing, so she leads the three and doesn't look back and just pretends that she can't hear them muttering. She crests the hill by the brook first and then looks down at the water's edge. She sits down. She can hear the two coming up behind her, still talking, walking through the grass, and she finally turns around to say something to them, but they're not there. The grass is flattening under their footsteps. A grasshopper jumps out of the way as if something were walking towards it. Their voices are getting closer. They're calling for her as if they can't see her. These invisible footsteps rush forward and cross the brook, making ripples in the water as they walk and talk, still invisible. Eleanor jumps up and runs back up the hill to check if they're there, and she finds Theo and Luke leaning against a tree in the shade. They say it's too hot, and they were calling for her to come and find them. Couldn't she hear them? That is so odd. Lunch. Mrs. Montague and Arthur are annoying everyone. Remember how Dr. Montague said that he thought of the twins and the Canterville Ghost as being like poltergeists? What if Mrs. Montague and Arthur are the poltergeists of this story? They're here to cause Eleanor anxiety. Theo and Luke go outside to play cricket. Eleanor sneaks out and hides behind them, trying to hear if they're talking about her. They aren't. Luke sings a song, one of those, like, bar shanty campfire songs about a murderer. Like the Mr. Johnny Rebecca, how could you be so mean? I told you you'd be sorry for inventing that machine. Like that kind of Boy Scout song. He's like singing that, but it's about a bunch of murders. The two then start talking about if they believe that they'll actually be mentioned by name in Dr. Montague's book. They wonder if he's going to write about his wife, about Arthur, about Mrs. Dudley. They mention everyone staying at the house except for Eleanor. So not only are they not talking about her, they're not talking about her. Then Theo and Luke go off to explore the woods alone and maybe find a place to swim. You guys got to remember that in the middle of Hill House, I started singing Mr. Johnny Verbeck. It's going to be on the test. Eleanor next sneaks up to the door where, inside, Dr. Montague and Arthur are supposed to be reading. Arthur continues to ask questions and keeps bothering Dr. Montague while he's trying to pay attention. She then goes and listens at the door where Mrs. Dudley and Mrs. Montague are talking. Mrs. Montague says it's inappropriate for unmarried young people to be staying in the same house, and Mrs. Dudley says that Theo is old enough to take care of herself, no matter how gay Luke is. Which means no matter how, like, boisterous, excitable, or happy like a puppy he is. Not like homosexual, although the use of the word here might hint that perhaps ironically, Theo is gay. Notice how she doesn't say anything about Eleanor. All she says is Theo could take care of herself. All of these conversations never once mention Eleanor, even though they should. It's almost like she's there only as a ghost. That night, they're all in the lounging room, and Mrs. Montague is complaining that her connection to the spirits isn't working. Eleanor is mad at Theo because Luke says that she looks nice in Eleanor's shirt. She's also just mad in general at Theo for, like, all of the drama they've been going through. Theo asks Luke if he could sing another song like he did outside with her earlier. He says no. Eleanor closes her eyes and thinks about all the stuff that's going on, and then Luke starts to sing, and it makes her feel a little better. Eleanor enters into a little trance. She can hear the dust floating around the house. She can hear the stove being on. She can hear the books rotting in the library. And as Luke sings, she thinks it's so incredibly nice. He's singing a game song, kind of like Ring Around the Rosie. Like kids go in a circle and they jump and they go ring around the rosy, and then they get to the end and they all fall down. Like, that's the game, but the game is a song. So what they're singing is Round the Village, where someone stands and then a bunch of people are around them in a circle, and then based on the line of the song, they need to do different things, like going in and out under their arms or just running around in a circle. So the lines that Luke sings are, go walking through the valley, go in and out the windows, go forth and face your lover, which are real lyrics to the song. There is no, like, one specific song, because just like with all these little folklore things, it changes based on whoever's singing it. But these are actual lyrics you can find for the song online. Eleanor enjoys it, and she's just kind of vibing. And then she feels like something is walking closer to her, like they're singing louder just for her. And as the voice and the footsteps approach her, she opens her eyes. She sees that Luke is on the other side of the room in the middle of a chess match. He was not singing. There was no song. This makes Eleanor smile, because it means the song was just for her. This is obviously spooky and concerning, and it also makes me think of some of the stories we read in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. You repeat the same thing 3 times, right? Mitidoti Walker, Johnny Liver, the voice is getting closer. It's outside. It's at your window. It's at your face. Through the valley, through the window, face your lover. The ghost is now right in front of her, if we take this into account. End of chapter 8. On to the final chapter. Eleanor can't sleep. She goes to the library to get a book. She reaches the door, but she can't go inside. She calls out for her mother. Her mother's voice tells her to come along. She follows her mother's voice gleefully upstairs. She follows it to the nursery. She knocks on the door. She asks if her mother is inside. Mrs. Montague calls that whoever's knocking on her door outside, please come in. Eleanor then knocks on Arthur's door. Luke, Theo, the doctor. She's knocking on everyone's door, but she accidentally woke Theo up. Theo yells for help because Eleanor's not in their room. Eleanor is clearly insane at this part of the story, or she's possessed. She's just not acting in any sort of logical, coherent way that's in line with her character. She hides throughout the house as they start looking for her. She goes to the statue room and she pretends to dance with the giant naked statue of Hugh Crane. She says that she is the house. She goes outside and then inside, and when she comes into the house, she thinks that she's home. Well, if she's dancing with Hugh, and it's her house, and she's finally home, then could she be playing the role of Hugh's wife, the one who died in the driveway, never having actually entered the home while in life? I have broken the spell of Hill House and somehow come inside. I am home, she thought, and stopped in wonder at the thought. I am home. I am home, she thought. Now, to climb. Remember, Hugh Crane's first wife died from the overturned carriage, the third died of an illness in Europe, but the second died from falling off something very high. Eleanor is now compelled to climb up the very tall tower that is the library. Climbing the narrow iron stairway was intoxicating, going higher and higher, around and around, looking down, clinging to the slim iron railing, looking far, far down onto the stone floor. Climbing, looking down, she thought of the soft green grass outside and the rolling hills and the rich trees. Looking up, she thought of the tower of Hill House rising triumphantly between the trees, tall over the road which wound through Hillsdale and past a white house set in flowers and past the magic oleanders, and past the stone lions and on, far, far away, to a little lady who was going to pray for her. Time is ended now, she thought. All that is gone and left behind, and that poor little lady praying still for me. That was a strange thing to read. This entire chapter has been strange thus far. We're kind of bouncing in and out all around her head. It is very difficult to follow because she is possessed or insane. We don't understand her motivation or why she's doing what she's doing. Besides wondering if she's just possessed by the house or by one of the ghosts, or maybe she's just totally gone insane. She thinks about looking out over Hillsdale, past a white house. Is this white house the one from her and Theo's little adventure into the garden? The magic oleanders is that row of trees. Remember, they're poisonous and so the fairies live there and they can't be interrupted. The stone lions are outside that house that when she was driving by it, she imagined herself living in one day. And the little old lady far, far away is the one whose grocery she knocked out of her hands the day she left to come to Hill House, who she then paid the cab fare for, and the old lady said that she would pray for her. But also, a lady praying for a ghost? Is this a reference to the Canterville Ghost? Where an innocent person has to pray for a ghost so they get to move on because time has ended because she's going to die. And then all the other characters burst in. Eleanor tries to go all the way up the tower to avoid them, but Luke meets her there and tells her that she has to come to her senses and come to the bottom. He slowly leads Eleanor down the stairs. Mrs. Montague is complaining that with all of the excitement going on, no ghosts are going to speak to her tonight. She is totally, currently, presently, right now missing that Eleanor is obviously possessed by a ghost. She's missing the forest for the magical oleander fairy garden. When Eleanor reaches the bottom of the stairs and they ask what she's doing, all she can say is that she's there to get a book, which was the last thing she thought before the possession took hold. She went to the library to get a book because she couldn't sleep, and right before touching the doors when she starts calling out to her mother, so she has now come out of the trance she was in. The next day after breakfast, Dr. Montague tells Luke to bring Eleanor's car around. She has to leave. She has to go home. Eleanor refuses. She says she loves it here. This is her home. She has nowhere else to go. Mrs. Montague says that she spoke to Eleanor's sister and they want their car back. Eleanor asks Theo what she'll do for clothes. And Theo says that actually, they went into her room the previous day. The writing on the wall was gone, and all of her clothes were somehow now unstained. Eleanor's going mad. She says that she doesn't want to leave. She wants to stay in the house. She wants to be walled up in the house. They force her into the car. Mrs. Montague asks if Arthur should drive her home, but Dr. Montague says no. Eleanor has to leave the way that she came in. She needs to forget Hill House. She needs to move on. And Theo says that they can meet up in the future. After the summer, after this experiment's over, maybe they can hang out sometime. Eleanor gets in the car, and she keeps saying goodbye to everyone. Goodbye, Luke. Goodbye, Theo. Goodbye, Arthur. Goodbye, 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 and she drives down the driveway. The Haunting of Hill House has a short epilogue, but this is how the final chapter ends. They will watch me down the drive as far as they can see, she thought. It is only civil for them to look at me until I am out of sight. So now I am going. Journeys end in lovers' meeting. But I won't go, she thought, and laughed aloud to herself. Hill House is not as easy as they are. Just by telling me to go away, they can't make me leave. Not if Hill House means me to stay. Go away, Eleanor, she chanted aloud. Go away, Eleanor. We don't want you anymore. Not in our Hill House. Go away, Eleanor. You can't stay here. But I can, she sang. But I can. They don't make the rules around here. They can't turn me out or shut me out or laugh at me or hide from me. I won't go. And Hill House belongs to me. With what she perceived as quick cleverness, she pressed her foot down hard on the accelerator. They can't run fast enough to catch me this time, she thought. But by now they must be beginning to realize. I wonder who notices first. Luke, almost certainly. I can hear them calling now, she thought. And the little footsteps running through Hill House and the soft sound of the hills pressing closer. I am really doing it, she thought, turning the wheel to send the car directly at the great tree at the curve of the driveway. I am really doing it. I am doing this all by myself. Now, at last, this is me. I am really, really, really doing it by myself. In the unending crashing second before the car hurled into the tree, she thought clearly. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Why don't they stop me? The end. Eleanor crashes into the tree at the exit gate. dying in a crash the same way that Hugh's wife did when she first went up the driveway. Now she can stay and haunt the house forever. Eleanor did go home, because Hill House is her home. In the epilogue, we learn that Theo goes back to her apartment and her roommate is happy to see her. Luke goes to Paris to get out of his aunt's hair. Dr. Montague's article about the house is ridiculed. And this is the final line of Hill House, mirroring the opening paragraph. Within, its walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there, walked alone. Eleanor now haunts the house, but everyone else has moved on. She walks there alone. She is basically within its walls. Is this a ghost story where the weak are strong, the impossible is possible, and the greatest thing we have to fear is ourselves? Yes, on all 3 counts. It's a 3 for 3 scary stories checklist of things that make a good urban legend ghost story. Absolutely phenomenal. Shirley Jackson, first of all, the prose writing this book, amazing. Investigating and researching other haunted houses in real life, absolutely incredible. Did you guys know that one of the most lauded, celebrated, and best classic horror novels of the 20th century is actually really good? And back then, she couldn't just Google, what's the name of that gun house again? What happened there? It was the 60s and the 50s. She had to actually go and look it up. Now, in the beginning, I mentioned how, as she's driving to the house, singing "Oh Mistress Mine," she gets to the line, "What's to come is still unsure," but before she can say it, she almost crashes her car. And now at the end of the story, when what is to come must be sure because the story's over, she dies in a crash. Did I expect that to be the literal ending when I wrote that while I was reading the script? No. I did not think the very last sentence of the story would be her dying. But I did think that a car crash would be involved in how her story ended. Whether it was literally a crash, whether it was swerving, whether it was something to do with like kicking a rock out of the way, a loud scraping sound, being distracted, like there was something about what happened that prevented her from singing that line that would lead to her fate. I just didn't know it was going to be so literal, so direct, perfectly mirror what happened to his first wife. I was able to come to that even more correct than I thought at the time conclusion because I looked up the lyrics to "Oh Mistress Mine." And I got all the nun references because I read about the nun house. And I got the old lady praying for her thing because I read the Canterville Ghost. I understood these references because I looked at the outside media that Shirley Jackson alluded to, and I made sure I read it before finishing the story. We are currently reading Hill House because it was alluded to in the title of a Star Wars comic book. And that comic is about a crew coming across a spaceship that crashed because of a ghost. And their own ship is called the Ghost, implying that it will crash if they continue along the same path. And in-universe, this story about the ghost ship crashing is being told by the crew of another ship that has just crashed. And how do they survive? How do they change the ending of their fate in this story? They get out of the crashing ship. Through reading Shakespeare's Twelfth Night in the passage where they sing "Oh Mistress Mine," you can come to a conclusion on what the characters should do in this Star Wars comic by way of the haunting of Hill House. And that is how you do literary analysis. I know a lot of you think that that tangent was probably very silly. And yes, I showed some cool links between Hill House and the Star Wars comic. And yes, I think it's intended that you do this. It is an intentional allusion in the title of that Star Wars comic, right? Like the connection between the haunting of Ghost and the haunting of Hill House is intended. The author said so himself. But yes, it is also silly. And I hope I've taught you something about how to read, how to do literary analysis. Even if you think that ultimately, as far as this is concerned in the entire FNAF Tales from the Pizzaplex project, it doesn't actually tell us anything about FNAF lore. But I do hope it showed you how to read. Why did we read Hill House? Because it shares a title with Star Wars. Why are we reading Star Wars? Because it shares a title with FNAF. The Pizzaplex in Tales from the Pizzaplex and the Vader's Castle in Tales from Vader's Castle are locations that we should compare to one another. It's why we're doing this entire tangent, because we're looking at the ways that things that inspire and allude to one another might interplay with the text of the thing we're actually analyzing. No, I am not literally saying that any important character in Tales is going to die in a car crash or something like that, but like, in the very, very loose and small chance that there is an incredibly important character in Tales who ends up dying in a car crash, it's something that we could look all the way back at Hill House and go, I wonder if in that incredibly important story in which one of the main characters dies in a car crash, Scott is actually thinking about the haunting of Hill House, and the lineage of horror, and especially the kind of horror that he may have grown up with as an unk. So we're already looking at the Pizzaplex and Vader's Castle the same way, but like Hill House, they explicitly say is not built on like another location. That's why they poo-poo the idea of a nun being there. So if there were hypothetically a story in Tales in which an important character died in a car crash that took place in somewhere that's not the Pizzaplex, maybe we should look at that location and compare it to Hill House, which is maybe why it was important that we just read Hill House before we read the Mimic story where David dies. And that was Cleithrophobia. And that was Cleithrophobia, The Haunting of the Ghost, The Haunting of Hill House, 12th Night, The Canterville Ghost, and the real story of a bunch of haunted houses. Did we talk about anything else? I don't remember. Oh, Mistress Mine, right? I kept referencing back to like Mitai Doti Walker and stuff like that. Yeah, okay. I think that's all the main stuff. Mr. Johnny Verbeck. And now we will, of course, be moving on to Tales from Vader's Castle, Issue 2. So this video is over now. Next week will be our entire coverage of the rest of Tales from Vader's Castle. It is incredibly important context for the rest of this series, and I will be referencing back to The Haunting of Hill House and the Canterville Ghost and all the things discussed in this video, the same way I'll be referencing back to the things we're going to discuss next week. So next week, even though we're not picking up a FNAF story, we're picking up the next issue of Vader, we're still talking about the things that are going to be important to FNAF going forward. That's the entire point of this full project. And when we get to the amalgam of all of the episodes of all of our entire discussion of Tales, this little detail into the Star Wars comic is going to seem like a really weird, half-dreamed blip when you reach the end of the video. You're going to go, oh yeah, like there was like a Star Wars thing in there. Was that separate from Hill House? I don't remember. It's important, it's incredibly useful context, and we will be talking about things that are necessary to understand the rest of Tales. So I do hope that you join us next time. I will be having a special guest in that video, and I hope you hear us out. Thank you for watching. Be sure to be nice to each other in the comments. Consider supporting the creators you admire. Never lose sight of the things that are important to you. Remember, we're trying to get to 361 patrons, YouTube members on Horror Homestead, and YouTube members on Spooky Shack. So if you want to get us to hit that goal, it would really help out. If you're watching on mobile, make sure you hype the video. It's even better than liking and commenting, although you should do that too. You should say, "Thank you, Mr. Canterville Ghost." Leave a comment thanking the Canterville Ghost. And I would like to personally thank Maury Mortimer for singing O Mistress Mine, and Candy Bunny for singing all of Bellora's lines. I can't believe that that was also this episode. Thank you for joining us. Here are my patrons. I would like to thank my $50 patron, Nolan, as well as my $10 patrons, Nan, Morgan, Scott, Brandon, Wooly, Annalie, Change Fairy, and Sophie, as well as my Horror Homestead YouTube members, my Night Guards, those who made it through Night 5, Semantics, Katie Kitty, Your Cringe Stepdad, Outright Regent, Just Because, and Momo Peaches, my longest member, Just Because, and my newest member, Milla for Life 2. I would also like to thank my Spooky Shack members, my Day Guards, those who made it through Night 5, Rakuzen, Tyrion and Penelope, and Your Cringe Stepdad, my longest member, Your Cringe Stepdad, and my newest member, Frankie K. And remember that Freddy stands for Friendly, Respectful Engagement, Discussion, and Discourse Yield Success. See you next week.